The bar didn't have a name. That was the first thing Naruto had noticed about it 3 weeks ago when he'd followed Anko Mitarashi through Konoha's back streets for the first time. No sign above the door, no lantern to mark the entrance. Just a slab of wood set into a concrete wall on a street where the gutters smelled like piss, and the streetlights had been broken so long the city had stopped replacing them. She came here every Thursday, sometimes Tuesday. Always after missions, always alone, always through the back alley where she wouldn't run into anyone who might try to talk to her. Naruto sat on the roof across the street, legs dangling over the edge, and watched her shadow pass behind the frosted glass window. She moved like she always did, that loose-limbed prowl, shoulders rolling, hips shifting, like a woman who'd forgotten how to move through the world without looking dangerous. Most people read it as arrogance. Naruto read it for what it was, armor. The kind you built out of attitude when the village had stripped away everything else. He'd been 14 for 6 days. Nobody had noticed his birthday. That was fine. Nobody was supposed to notice anything about him at all. He dropped from the roof without a sound, landing in the alley on the balls of his feet, and pulled the hood of his jacket up over his hair. The orange jumpsuit was at home, folded neatly in a drawer he hadn't opened in 8 months. Tonight he wore dark gray, nondescript, forgettable, the kind of clothing that turned a person into a piece of the background. He'd stolen it from a supply depot on the eastern edge of the village, which technically made it standard issue Anbu underclothing, but he tried not to think about that. The bar's back door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. The owner, a retired chunin with a bad leg and worse judgment, didn't believe in locks, said they attracted the wrong kind of attention. Naruto slipped inside through the kitchen, past a cook who was asleep on a stool with a cigarette burning between his fingers, and pushed through the swinging door into the main room. 6 tables, a bar with 9 stools. 3 of the tables occupied, a pair of off-duty gate guards playing cards, a woman Naruto didn't recognize nursing something clear, and in the far corner, her back to the wall with sightlines on every entrance, Anko Mitarashi. She had a bottle of shochu in front of her, half empty. 1 cup, poured and untouched. Her coat was on, that long brown thing she always wore over her mesh shirt, the one that hid the curve of the curse mark on the back of her neck. Her headband was missing. She hadn't been wearing it for weeks, actually. Naruto had noticed. He walked to the bar, ordered tea because ordering anything else at his age would blow his cover, and sat on the stool closest to her corner. Not facing her, not watching her, just near. He sipped his tea and waited. 3 weeks of surveillance had taught him plenty. Anko Mitarashi was 24 years old, a Tokubetsu Jonin in title only. She hadn't been given a mission above C rank in over a year. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building where half the units were empty. She ate dango for breakfast, skipped lunch, and drank dinner. She trained alone at Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death, because nobody else wanted to go there, and that suited her perfectly. She had no team, no close friends. Her last known relationship of any kind had been a casual thing with a chunin named Isamu, who'd transferred to the Border Patrol 6 months ago and hadn't written. What she had was a reputation. Orochimaru's student. The one he'd marked, experimented on, and thrown away. The village looked at her and saw a stain they couldn't quite scrub out, too useful to discharge, too suspicious to trust. So they'd done what hidden villages do best with inconvenient people. They'd put her in a box and forgotten her, and she was letting them. That was the thing that had caught Naruto's attention, the detail that had turned idle curiosity into genuine focus. Because Anko Mitarashi was brilliant. He'd watched her fight, really fight, not the lazy exhibitions she put on during the chunin exam preliminaries, and she was something close to terrifying. Speed, precision, adaptability. Her snake techniques were a bastardized version of Orochimaru's style, stripped of the theatrical flourishes and rebuilt for pure killing efficiency. She could summon, she could poison, she could disappear into shadows with a skill that would make most Anbu operatives jealous. And she was rotting. Naruto understood rotting. He'd spent the first 12 years of his life doing it, smiling while the village looked through him, laughing while the loneliness ate him hollow, playing the fool because the fool was the only role they'd let him have. He'd stopped rotting the night he'd discovered what was really sealed inside him, the night the Kyubai's chakra had surged through his coils for the first time and burned away every comfortable lie he'd been telling himself. The fox hadn't made him strong. The fox had made him angry. And anger, properly directed, was the most useful tool in the world. He finished his tea and ordered another. The card game at the far table broke up around 11. The gate guard stumbled out, laughing too loud, their awareness so poor that Naruto could have slit both their throats on the way past, and they would have died confused. The woman with the clear drink left shortly after, moving with the careful precision of someone who was sober and pretending not to be. Interesting. He filed that away. That left him, the sleeping cook, the bartender reading a newspaper, and Anko. She poured her cup for the third time since he'd been watching. Drank it in one motion, poured another. The bottle was running low. Naruto stood, picked up his tea, and walked to her table. Anko's eyes tracked him the moment he moved. Up close, she looked worse than she did from rooftops. Dark circles carved under her eyes, a bruise on her jaw, yellowing, 4 or 5 days old. Her fingernails were bitten to the quick. She was still dangerous. The way she'd shifted when he approached told him that much, her weight redistributing onto her back foot, her right hand drifting under the table where she probably had a kunai strapped to her thigh. But she was dangerous the way a wounded animal was dangerous. Reactive. Unpredictable, not strategic, he could work with that. That seat's taken, Anko said. Her voice was rougher than it sounded in public when she was performing the brash, loud version of herself. Quieter, flatter. No, it's not. She stared at him. He watched her process what she was seeing, a kid, 14, nobody she recognized, dark clothes, no headband visible. A civilian teenager in a bar he shouldn't be in. That was the obvious read. He watched her almost take it, almost. "You've been sitting at that bar for 2 hours," she said. "Drinking tea. It's good tea. It's terrible tea. Ishida waters it down." She tilted her head, and for a moment the flatness in her eyes shifted into something sharper. "You're too young to be in here, and you're too quiet to be a normal kid who snuck in on a dare. Maybe I'm a very boring kid who likes bad tea. Maybe," she took a drink, set the cup down, "or maybe you're the same person who's been following me for the past 3 weeks. The air between them went still. Naruto let himself smile. Not the grin, not the big dumb sunshine expression he wore at the academy like a mask. A real smile, small and private and slightly crooked. "You noticed. I noticed something. Caught a shadow on a rooftop 8 days ago that shouldn't have been there. Felt someone in my blind spot twice at the training ground." She leaned forward, and the light caught the edge of something metallic in her hand under the table. Definitely a kunai. "Figured it was root. They check up on me every few months. Make sure Orochimaru's little tattoo isn't making me do anything treasonous." The word came out bitter, practiced, like she'd said it so many times it had worn smooth. But Root doesn't drink tea in dive bars, and Root sure as hell doesn't look like a teenager. "I'm not Root," Naruto said. "Then what are you?" He pulled the chair out and sat down across from her. She let him. That was significant. She was curious now, and curiosity was stronger than caution. He'd been counting on that. "My name's Naruto Uzumaki." Whatever she'd been expecting, it wasn't that. Her eyes widened, and he watched the recognition hit, the village pariah. The dead last academy student, the loud blonde kid in the orange jumpsuit who'd failed the graduation exam and stumbled his way onto a genin team through some incident nobody talked about. He didn't look like that kid right now. The dark clothes, the stillness, the way he was sitting across from a Tokubetsu Jonin without a trace of anxiety in his body. He could see her struggling to reconcile the two images. "Bullshit," she said. "Would you like me to prove it?" He held up his right hand, and a wisp of red chakra curled between his fingers, just a thread, barely visible, gone in a heartbeat. But she saw it. Her whole body went rigid. "The Jinchuriki," she whispered, "among other things." Anko's grip on the kunai tightened. He could tell because her forearm flexed under the sleeve of her coat. "Give me one reason I shouldn't drag you to the Hokage's office right now." "I'll give you 3, Naruto said. He kept his voice even, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. 1, you don't actually want to go to the Hokage's office. You haven't filed a mission report in person in 4 months because every time you walk in there, someone looks at you like you're going to sprout snake heads and start attacking people. 2, if you thought I was a real threat, you'd have put that kunai through my throat already instead of holding it under the table like a safety blanket. And 3, he paused, meeting her eyes. You're curious. You've been bored and angry and wasted for so long that someone showing up with a mystery is the most interesting thing that's happened to you in months. And you want to hear what I have to say." Silence. Anko stared at him for a long time. The bar hummed with the low buzz of a failing light fixture. The cook snored in the kitchen. Then she pulled the kunai out from under the table and set it on the surface between them, blade pointing toward him. Not a threat. A statement. "I'm armed, I'm aware, and I'm listening. Don't waste my time." "Talk," she said. He told her the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. He told her that he wasn't the person Konoha thought he was. That the idiot, the dead last, the class clown was a performance he'd been giving since he was old enough to understand that being underestimated was the best protection a Jinchuriki could have. That beneath the mask, he'd been teaching himself, training himself, building himself into something the village had never bothered to imagine he could be. He told her about the Kyuubi, not the sanitized version the academy taught, the mindless beast sealed by a hero's sacrifice. The real version. A being of immense intelligence and older rage, trapped inside a child nobody wanted, leaking chakra and knowledge through the cracks in a seal that was more complex than anything Konoha's current seal masters could comprehend. He'd learned to listen to that leaking knowledge. Fragments of techniques, whispers of strategy, the muscle memory of a creature that had watched human warfare for centuries. It wasn't a partnership. The fox hated him as much as it hated everything else, but it was an education. "You're telling me," Anko said slowly, "that the 9-tailed demon fox has been tutoring you." "Not intentionally. The seal bleeds. When I sleep, I catch pieces of what it knows. Combat patterns, chakra manipulation theory, geography. The fox has been everywhere, seen everything. I started writing it down when I was 9. Filled 16 notebooks before I realized most of it was too advanced for me to use, so I started training to catch up to what I already knew. Alone. Who was going to help me? Uruka-sensei tried, but he's one man with 30 students and his own damage. Kakashi. A flicker of something crossed Naruto's face, gone too fast to read. Kakashi teaches Sasuke. I'm an afterthought on my own team. Anko poured the last of the shochu into her cup but didn't drink it. So you're some kind of secret prodigy. Fine, the world's full of prodigies. What does that have to do with me? I'm not a prodigy. I'm something worse. I'm patient. He leaned back in his chair. I've spent the last 2 years building something. A network. Small, quiet, completely off Konoha's radar, information channels, supply caches. Safe houses between here and the borders of 3 countries. I've been doing it with shadow clones, hundreds of them, working in shifts, transforming into different people, building relationships and infrastructure in a dozen places at once. Anko blinked. Then she blinked again. Shadow clones. You've been using shadow clones as what? A private intelligence service? Among other things, the clones learn. When they disperse, I get everything they experienced. One of me can be at the academy playing dumb while 30 of me are running operations across the land of fire. He watched her work through the implications. She was smart. He'd known she would be. He could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the sheer scope of what he was describing registering piece by piece. But I have a problem. Just one. The clones are useful, but they're limited. They pop if someone hits them hard. They can't sustain injuries or adapt to situations that require real combat, and they're all me, same face, same instincts, same blind spots. I need people. Real people. People I can trust. You're 14, you don't have people. No, Naruto agreed. I don't. That's why I'm here. Anko picked up the cup and drank, set it down empty, looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, somewhere between disbelief and something dangerously close to recognition. You want to recruit me, she said. I want to offer you a choice. Don't dress it up. You've been stalking me for 3 weeks. You came in here with a pitch. Let's hear it straight. Fair enough. He respected that. You're one of the best combat operatives in this village, he said. Your taijutsu is A rank. Your ninjutsu portfolio includes techniques most Jonin would trade a year's salary to learn. You're a poison specialist, a snake summoner, an infiltration expert, and you have 10 years of mission experience. You're also being wasted. Konoha gives you garbage assignments, treats you like a liability, and has been slowly grinding you down into someone who drinks alone on Thursday nights and picks fights she doesn't care about winning. Something flickered in Anko's eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. The two looked similar on her. I'm offering you out, Naruto continued. Come with me. Work with me. Not as a subordinate, I'm not stupid enough to think I can order around someone with your experience. As a partner, I have the network, the resources, the strategic vision. You have the skills, the knowledge, and the kind of field experience I can't fake with shadow clones. He held her gaze. I'm building something real, Anko. Something that operates outside the villages, outside the politics, outside the bullshit system that decided you were worth less than nothing because your old teacher turned out to be a monster. You can stay here and keep rotting, or you can come with me and be what you actually are. And what's that? Dangerous. The word hung between them. Anko didn't move, didn't blink. The light fixture buzzed, then she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was raw and sharp, and had too many edges. The kind of laugh that came out when the alternative was screaming or throwing a table through a wall. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and laughed, until it turned into something that wasn't quite laughing anymore, and Naruto sat across from her and didn't say a word. She dropped her hands. Her eyes were dry. Whatever that had been, she'd locked it down fast. You're out of your mind, she said, probably. You're a 14-year-old genin who thinks he's been chosen by a demon fox to build some kind of shadow empire, and you want a washed-up snake lady to be your what? Your assassin? Your right hand? Your pet project, my partner. He said again, without heat. And I didn't say anything about being chosen. The fox didn't choose me. My father chose me. He sealed the Kyuubi inside his own son because he didn't have anyone else. Everything after that was just me deciding I wasn't going to lie down and die because it would have been more convenient for everyone. Anko went very still. Your father, Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage. He said it without drama, without fanfare. Just a fact dropped between them like a stone into still water. I found out 8 months ago. One of the fox's memory bleeds, a fragment of the ceiling seen from the inside. I saw his face, figured the rest out from there. Does anyone know? And it stays that way. Anko stared at him. He could see her reassessing everything, not just him, but the entire situation, the entire village, the entire rotten structure that had taken the 4th Hokage's son and turned him into a pariah. He watched something shift behind her eyes. Not sympathy. Anko wasn't the sympathetic type. Something harder than that, something that looked like recognition. They threw you away too, she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They sat in silence for a while. The bartender closed out the register and started wiping down the counter with the bored efficiency of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. The cook woke up, swore at his burned-out cigarette, and disappeared through the back door. Through the frosted window, the street outside was empty. Konoha's nightlife didn't extend to this neighborhood. Anko turned her empty cup between her fingers, round and round, a nervous habit she probably didn't know she had. Say I believe you, she said finally. Say everything you've told me is true, the clones, the network, the fox. Say I walk out of here with you tonight. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we leave Konoha? Just like that. I have a route planned. A safe house 40 kilometers northwest, in the forest between Fire Country and River Country. An old facility, underground, pre-war construction, abandoned for decades. I've spent 6 months making it livable. That's where we'd be based. From there, I'm not asking about logistics. She set the cup down hard enough that it cracked against the table. I'm asking what happens to me. I walk away from Konoha, that's desertion. I become a missing nin. I go in the bingo book, I get a bounty, I get hunted. There's no coming back from that. There is if you were never officially gone. She frowned. What? I told you, shadow clones. I've already prepared one. A reinforced clone with enough chakra to last weeks at a time, running on a behavioral pattern I've mapped from watching you. It goes to your apartment, does your routine, takes whatever garbage missions the assignment desk throws at you. Nobody looks at you closely enough to tell the difference. As far as Konoha knows, Anko Mitarashi is right where she's always been, the same bar, same training ground, same miserable routine. Meanwhile, the real you is somewhere else entirely. Anko opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's insane, she said. That's the chakra cost alone. Maintaining a shadow clone for weeks, while running your own operations. The Kyubai's chakra is functionally infinite. It's the one advantage of being a Jinchuriki that nobody talks about. I don't run out. The clone will need to be refreshed every 10 to 14 days, which means I'll need to come back to the village periodically, but I'm doing that anyway for my own cover. Kakashi thinks I'm training on my own between missions. The old man, he caught himself. The Hokage knows I wander. He's never asked where I go. I think he's afraid of the answer. Anko's hand moved to the back of her neck. She didn't seem to realize she was doing it. Her fingers found the edge of her collar and pressed against the skin beneath, right where Naruto knew the curse mark sat like a brand. The curse mark, she said. If I leave the village, there's no one to monitor it. If it activates, I know about the curse mark. You don't know anything about the curse mark. Orochimaru's Juin Jutsu, a parasitic seal that feeds on the host's chakra and emotions, particularly negative ones. It enhances physical abilities at the cost of mental stability and has a roughly 1 in 10 survival rate during initial application. The seal is based on enzyme markers derived from Jugo's clan, natural energy metabolizers from an unnamed village in the land of hot water. The mark on your neck is a heaven's seal, which means it primarily affects your upper body and neural pathways. He paused. How am I doing? Anko's hand had frozen on her neck. She was staring at him with an expression that had gone past shock into something cold and sharp. Where did you learn that? She asked, and her voice had dropped into a register that promised violence. The fox fought Orochimaru once, a long time ago, before the villages, before the sealing. Orochimaru was researching ways to achieve immortality through natural energy manipulation, and he got close enough to the Kyuubi to attract its attention. The fox remembers him. Naruto's expression darkened. It doesn't remember him fondly. Nobody remembers him fondly. I know. But here's what matters. The curse mark isn't unbreakable. It's a seal, and every seal has a structure. The Kyuubi's knowledge of natural energy manipulation is extensive. Between what I know and what you know about how the mark functions from the inside, I believe we can find a way to neutralize it. Not suppress it. Kakashi's evil sealing method is a bandage, not a cure. I'm talking about dismantling it entirely. Something happened in Anko's face that Naruto hadn't seen in 3 weeks of watching her. The mask cracked. Not the loud, aggressive public mask, the deeper one beneath it, the flat gray nothing she wore when she was alone and there was nobody to perform for. That mask cracked, and underneath it was something raw and desperate and furious. She looked away fast, pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose. Don't, she said. Her voice was tight. Don't make promises you can't keep, not about that. I don't make promises I can't keep. I make statements of intent and then I do the work. She laughed again, just once, short and broken. You sound like a mission briefing. I sound like someone who means it. Anko was quiet for a long time. Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. The bartender turned off the overhead light and switched on a dim lamp behind the bar, the universal signal for I want to close. Please leave. If I do this, Anko said slowly, And I'm not saying I am if I walked out of here with you tonight. What exactly would my role be? You said partner. That's a nice word. What does it mean in practice? It means I train you in what I know, and you train me in what you know. It means we run operations together, the kind of operations that matter. Not fetching cats and guarding merchants. Real work. Eliminating threats. Gathering intelligence. Building something that can operate in the spaces between villages where nobody's looking. He leaned forward. And it means that when I make a decision you think is wrong, you tell me, I'm 14, I'm smart, but I'm not wise. I've never had anyone in my life who'd tell me the truth without an agenda attached. I need someone who'll call me an idiot when I'm being one. I can definitely do that. I know. That's part of why I picked you. Anko studied him across the table. The dim lamp behind the bar threw shadows across her face, deepening the hollows under her eyes, sharpening the lines of her jaw. She didn't look like a broken woman in that light. She looked like a weapon someone had left on a shelf too long. You picked me because I'm expendable, she said. Because if this goes wrong and I get caught, nobody in Konoha will fight to bring me back. They'll just shake their heads and say they always knew Orochimaru's student would turn traitor. That's why approaching you is strategically low risk, Naruto admitted. It's not why I picked you. Then why? He thought about lying. Thought about giving her the tactical answer, the calculated response, the version of the truth that sounded most persuasive. That was what the smart play was, the manipulative play, the one the fox's borrowed instincts whispered was most efficient. He told her the truth instead. Because I've watched you for 3 weeks, and every day you go through the same routine, and every day I can see that you hate it, and every day you go back and do it again because you don't believe you deserve anything better. He paused. I know what that feels like, and I'm done accepting it, for me or for anyone else. Anko didn't say anything. The bartender coughed pointedly. Naruto stood, extended his hand across the table, not to shake, not as a formal gesture, just an open hand offered. Come with me, he said, or don't. But make the choice tonight, because I won't ask again. Anko looked at his hand, looked at the empty bottle on the table. Looked at the cracked walls of a bar without a name, in a neighborhood nobody cared about, at the end of another night that was exactly like every other night she'd survived through for the past 10 years. She stood up. She didn't take his hand. She picked up her kunai, slid it back into the holster on her thigh, and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. If this is a trap, she said, I will kill you, Jinchuriki or not. If this is a trap, I'll deserve it. She walked past him toward the door, stopped. Looked back over her shoulder. Are you coming or not, kid? Naruto allowed himself one small, real smile. Then he followed her into the dark. They moved through Konoha like ghosts. Naruto led, not because he was in charge, but because he knew the route. Every patrol pattern, every camera angle, every gap in the village's perimeter security. He'd mapped them all over the course of a year, sending shadow clones out at every hour of the day and night, testing, probing, cataloging. Konoha's defenses were impressive from the outside. From the inside, they were full of holes, because the village had been at peace for long enough that complacency had settled in like rot. They went east first, away from the main gate, toward the civilian residential district where the streets were narrow, and the buildings pressed close enough together to jump between rooftops without crossing open sky. Anko followed without questions, which told him she was either trusting him or reserving her energy for the ambush she half expected. Probably both. At the base of the outer wall, in a section that ran behind a textile factory that operated only during the day, Naruto stopped. He placed his hand flat against the stone and pushed chakra into a specific point, not a seal, not a technique. Just a marker, a trace of the Kyuubi's chakra he'd left months ago that resonated when he touched it, warming the stone and revealing a crack that ran from the base of the wall to a point just above head height. I loosened the mortar in this section 6 months ago, he said quietly. 3 shadow clones working at night, a little bit at a time. The wall looks solid from both sides, but this section is basically held together by gravity and habit. Watch. He pushed, and a portion of the wall swung inward like a door, revealing a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Beyond it, darkness, the smell of earth and pine, and the sound of wind moving through trees. Anko stared at the gap. Then she stared at him. "You put a door in Konoha's wall," she said flatly. "I put 3 doors in Konoha's wall. This is the one closest to our exit route." "You," she pressed her fingers to her temples. "The village's perimeter wall, the defensive structure that's been standing since the first Hokage built it. You just knocked a hole in it. A very discreet hole. And I reinforced it with a minor earth jutsu so it doesn't actually compromise the structural integrity. I'm not trying to get the village invaded. I just needed a way in and out that didn't involve the gates." Anko stared at him for another long moment. Then something happened to her face, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, a crinkling around her eyes, and she laughed. Not the broken laugh from the bar. A real one, surprised out of her, bright and incredulous in the dark. "You're absolutely insane," she whispered. "You're a 14-year-old lunatic, and I'm following you through a hole in the wall at midnight." "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation." She shook her head, still grinning, and squeezed through the gap. Naruto followed, pulling the stone section closed behind them with a pulse of chakra that settled it back into place. Seamless, invisible, they stood at the edge of the forest. Konoha's lights glowed behind the wall, soft and orange, the village sleeping peacefully unaware that 2 of its residents had just walked out of its embrace like ghosts leaving a graveyard. Anko breathed in deep. The air here was different, wilder, colder, full of the smells of pine and wet earth and the distant musk of animals that didn't come near human settlements. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and Naruto saw something in her posture shift, a loosening. The slightest unclenching of muscles that had been locked tight for years. "Northwest?" she asked. "Northwest. About 40 kilometers. We'll run it, should take a few hours if we pace ourselves." "I don't need to pace myself, kid." "Then try to keep up." He launched into the trees, chakra surging into his legs, and the night swallowed him. Behind him, he heard Anko follow, a rustle of branches, the whisper of fabric, and then she was beside him, matching his speed. Her body moving through the canopy with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd been doing this since before he was born. The moonlight caught her face as she leaped from branch to branch, and she was smiling. Not the sharp, defensive grin she wore in public. Something smaller, more private, something that looked like the beginning of being alive again. They'd been running for an hour when Anko pulled ahead and cut left, forcing him to adjust. He followed, reading the move for what it was, a test. She wanted to know if he could keep up when she set the pace. She was fast. Genuinely, shockingly fast. Naruto had known she was good. He'd watched her fight, analyzed her movement patterns, calculated her approximate speed and reaction time from a distance. But seeing it from a rooftop and experiencing it in person were different things entirely. She moved through the trees like water, every motion efficient, every transition seamless. She didn't waste chakra on flashy leaps or unnecessary acrobatics. She just flowed, branch to branch, shifting her weight with an instinct that came from 10 years of running through forests on missions that could end with a knife in your back. Naruto pushed harder. The Kyubai's chakra simmered at the base of his coils, always ready, always available, and he let a thin stream of it bleed into his legs. His speed jumped. Branches blurred. He closed the gap, pulled alongside her, and they ran together in silence for another 10 minutes, the forest flashing past in patterns of shadow and moonlight. Then Anko stopped. She landed on a thick branch and held up a fist, the standard shinobi signal for halt. Naruto dropped onto the branch beside her, instantly alert, his senses stretching outward. He could feel the Kyubai's awareness stirring behind his eyes, the fox's supernatural perception layering over his own. "What is it?" Anko tilted her head, listening, her nostrils flared. "Tripwire." She said, 60 meters ahead between those 2 oaks. See the gap in the moss on the left trunk? Someone scraped it clean recently." Naruto looked. He couldn't see it, the moonlight wasn't strong enough, and his eyes, even enhanced by the fox's chakra, weren't trained for this. He'd been so focused on speed and stealth that he'd nearly run straight into a trap he couldn't detect. He filed this away under the growing list of reasons he needed Anko Mitarashi. Whose? He asked. Not Anbu, they use different wire. Not civilian, the placement's too good. She dropped to a crouch on the branch, studying the approach. Could be Hunter Nin from another village. Could be bandits who got lucky with their equipment supplier. Could be Root. The word landed between them with weight. Naruto felt something cold settle into his stomach. Root operates this close to the village. Root operates everywhere. Danzo's people don't follow the same rules as regular Anbu. They set watch lines along every major exit route from Konoha, not to stop people, just to record who comes and goes. Most of the time the data just sits in Danzo's files. But if someone interesting crosses a line, she trailed off. How much do you know about Danzo? Enough to avoid him. Shimura Danzo, former teammate of the 3rd Hokage, founder of Root, technically disbanded, but everyone who matters knows he's still operating. He believes the village should be run like a machine, with him holding the controls. He collects weapons, people, techniques, secrets, and he doesn't share. He also collects Jinchuriki intelligence, Anko said. Her voice had gone flat again, the warmth from their run evaporating. I know because I've seen the files. He had a dossier on you 4 inches thick the last time I was inside the intelligence division building. Psychological profile, chakra development estimates, seal stability projections. He's been watching you since you were born. Something cold moved through Naruto's chest. He'd known Danzo existed. He'd factored the man's likely surveillance into his plans, built countermeasures, avoided patterns that might attract attention. But a 4-inch dossier suggested a level of interest that went beyond passive monitoring. And you didn't mention this at the bar? You didn't ask. Anko shot him a look that was almost amused. You spent 3 weeks watching me. He spent 14 years watching you. Maybe you're not the only one in this forest playing chess. The implication settled over him like a cold blanket. He forced himself to think through it, not to react, not to let the fox's paranoia bleed into his own decision-making. Danzo knew about him. Danzo had files on him. That didn't necessarily mean Danzo knew about the network, the clones, the secret exits. It meant Danzo was interested. And interest could be managed, redirected, deceived, but it was a complication he couldn't ignore. Can we go around the wire? He asked. We can. But it'll cost us an hour, and whoever said it will know someone diverted, that tells them the forest has traffic tonight. Anko's smile came back, sharper now, the smile of someone about to do something dangerous. Or we trip it and deal with whatever comes. That seems counterproductive. It is if you're trying to stay hidden, but if you're trying to send a message, she looked at him. You said you wanted a partner who'd tell you the truth. Here's the truth, kid. You can't build what you're building without eventually running into Danzo. He's got fingers in every shadow in this country. The question isn't whether he finds out about you, it's what he finds when he does. And you think we should announce ourselves? I think we should be the ones choosing the terms of the introduction. Right now, tonight, while we're fresh and moving and he doesn't know we're together. If a root sensor picks up our trail, they report it. But what do they report? An unidentified shinobi, and if I mask my chakra right, another unidentified shinobi. 2 unknowns tripping a wire on a forest patrol line. It's noise. It's not actionable, but it tells us something valuable. What? How fast Root responds. What their deployment pattern looks like. How many operatives they have in this sector. Her eyes glinted. First rule of infiltration, Naruto. You don't avoid the enemy's security, you test it, map it, and find the gaps. You can't do that from a distance. You do it by touching the wire and watching what moves. Naruto looked at her. She looked back at him. She was right. He knew she was right, and he hated it a little, because it meant his plan for a clean, invisible exit from the village was already adapting, already changing, already getting messy. But messy was what happened when you worked with real people instead of clones. How do we do this? He asked. Anko's grin widened. She reached into her coat and produced a scroll, one she must have grabbed from her apartment before they'd left. though he hadn't seen her do it. She unrolled it on the branch and bit her thumb, dragging a line of blood across the summoning array. A snake appeared. Small, maybe 30 centimeters long, dark green with a yellow underbelly. It coiled around her wrist and flicked its tongue, tasting the air. "This is Midori," Anko said. "She's a sensor type. She can taste chakra signatures from about 200 meters. She's going to go ahead of us, trip that wire, and then tell us exactly who comes running." She looked at the snake. "You good," the snake's tongue flicked. It slithered off her wrist and vanished into the canopy without a sound. They waited. The forest breathed around them. An owl called somewhere to the south. The moon drifted behind a thin cloud and emerged again, painting everything in silver gray. 5 minutes passed. Then the snake reappeared, sliding up the trunk to Anko's position. It coiled around her wrist, and she tilted her head, listening to something Naruto couldn't hear. The snake communicated through vibrations, not sound, a language of pressure and rhythm against skin that Anko read like text. "Two operatives," she said. "Both masked. Standard root equipment, tanto, suppression seals, communication scrolls. They responded in 90 seconds from a position about 300 meters east. That means there's a staging post in that direction, probably a hollow tree or underground cache." "Did they see Midori?" "No. They checked the wire, found it triggered by what looks like a rabbit. Midori left some fur from a kill she found nearby. Very convincing. They're resetting the wire and returning to position." She stroked the snake's head with one finger. "Two operators for this sector, 90-second response time, 300-meter range. That's their perimeter. We go around them to the north, give them a 400-meter buffer, and we're clear." Naruto felt something shift inside him, not the fox, not chakra, something quieter. A feeling he didn't have a name for, or maybe had never felt before, so he didn't recognize it. This was what it was like to have someone competent on your side. Someone who didn't need to be managed or directed or protected. Someone who saw a problem and solved it with the casual efficiency of a decade's experience, then handed him the results like it was nothing. He'd been alone for so long that the simple act of someone being useful hit him like a fist. "North it is," he said. His voice came out steady. "Good." They moved north, wide around the route perimeter, and didn't speak again for an hour. The forest thickened as they traveled, the canopy closing overhead until the moonlight came through in narrow shafts. Anko moved with a different energy now, alert but not tense, engaged but not anxious. Like she'd been sleeping and had just woken up. Naruto led them along a route he'd mapped with clones, a path that followed a dry creek bed, climbed a ridge, and descended into a valley where the trees were old enough that their root systems created a maze of natural tunnels beneath the forest floor. At the bottom of the valley, hidden under a shelf of rock that had been camouflaged with earth and vegetation, was a metal door. He pressed his palm against it. Chakra recognition, a seal he'd designed himself, based on fragments of the Kyubai's knowledge of Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. The door clicked and swung inward. "Welcome home," Naruto said. The facility was pre-war. Naruto had found it 8 months ago, following a set of coordinates that had surfaced in one of the fox's memory bleeds. A fragment of a map, seen once through the eyes of a creature that had been passing overhead decades before humans had claimed this forest. The structure had been built by someone who understood that the best fortification was one nobody knew existed. 3 levels, mostly underground, constructed from reinforced concrete and stone, with ventilation shafts disguised as natural rock formations. The top level was living space. 2 rooms that Naruto had cleaned, furnished with salvaged equipment, and stocked with supplies. The second level was a training area, a large open chamber with high ceilings and walls that still bore the scorch marks of whatever techniques had been practiced here decades ago. The third level was storage and infrastructure. Water filtration connected to an underground stream, a generator that ran on chakra-converted fuel, and a sealed archive room where Naruto kept his notebooks, his maps, and the carefully organized intelligence files his clone network had compiled. Anko walked through it in silence, running her hand along the walls, checking sight lines and exits with the automatic precision of someone who'd been trained to assess every space for tactical advantage. Naruto let her explore without commentary. She needed to see it, touch it, understand it on her own terms. She ended up in the training chamber, standing in the center of the room under a ceiling high enough that her voice echoed slightly when she finally spoke. "You built this yourself." The building was already here. "I just made it functional. You stocked it, fortified it, wired it, sealed it, alone at 13. She turned to face him. "The clones, mostly. Some things I had to do in person, the seal work, the chakra wiring. But the heavy lifting, the supply runs, the camouflage, that was all clones." She shook her head slowly. "I've been a shinobi for 12 years. I've seen Jonin who couldn't set up a forward operating base this clean." She looked at him with something that wasn't quite respect, not yet, but was in the same neighborhood. "You really aren't what Konoha thinks you are." "No. And nobody knows. You know." She absorbed that. The weight of it, the trust it represented, the vulnerability. He'd handed her the ability to destroy everything he'd built with a single report to the Hawkage. He'd done it deliberately, because trust that wasn't backed by risk wasn't trust at all. "There's a room for you down the hall," he said. "Bed, storage, basic amenities. We start tomorrow at dawn." "Start what?" "Training. You teach me what you know, I teach you what I know, we figure out how to work together, and then we start doing the work." "And what work is that, exactly?" "You've been vague about the details." "Because the details depend on you. I have targets, people and organizations that operate in the space between villages, threats that Konoha's official channels are too slow or too political to address. Black market weapons suppliers, missing nin cells. Intelligence brokers who sell to the highest bidder regardless of the cost in lives. I've been tracking them with clones, but tracking isn't enough. Someone needs to act." He paused. "That's us." Anko crossed her arms. "So you want to play vigilante?" "I want to make the world less dangerous for the people who can't protect themselves. Call it whatever you want." She looked at him for a long time, and he let her look. Standing still in the center of his underground training room with his dark clothes, and his steady eyes, and his 14 years of lived experience that had somehow produced something that shouldn't exist. A child with the strategic mind of a general and the operational infrastructure of an intelligence agency. "Dawn," she said finally. "Don't be late. I won't go easy on you because you're a kid. I'd be insulted if you did." She turned and walked toward the hallway, stopped at the door, didn't look back. "Naruto?" "Yeah. If you ever call me your personal assassin or anything like that, anything that makes it sound like you own me, I will break every bone in your body." "Clear, Crystal." "Good." A pause. "And thanks for the choice." She disappeared down the hallway. A door opened and closed. Silence settled over the facility, broken only by the faint hum of the generator and the distant sound of water moving through underground stone. Naruto stood alone in the training chamber. He breathed in, breathed out. Deep inside him, behind the seal, the Kyuubi stirred. Well, the fox rumbled, its voice like tectonic plates grinding together in the dark. That was either very clever or very stupid. "Those are usually the same thing," Naruto said quietly. "She's damaged, unstable. The snake's mark on her neck is a liability, a beacon for its creator." "I know." "Then you know Orochimaru will come eventually. Through the mark, through his spy, through whatever means he chooses. You've attached yourself to a target. I've attached myself to a person." The fox was silent for a moment. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that might have been contempt, or might have been something older and more complicated. "Your father said something similar once. Before he sealed me inside his infant son." Naruto closed his eyes. The training chamber hummed around him, empty and waiting. Tomorrow, they'd begin. Tomorrow, Anko would try to kill him in sparring, and he'd try to surprise her with what the fox had taught him, and they'd both fail and adjust and try again. Tomorrow, the clone he'd left in Konoha would wake up in his apartment, put on the orange jumpsuit, and shuffle to the training ground where Kakashi would be late, and Sasuke would brood and Sakura would sigh and nobody would notice anything was different. Tomorrow, The real Naruto Uzumaki would start building something that had no name yet, in a hole in the ground, with a woman who smelled like snake venom and hadn't smiled in years. He was terrified. He was excited. He was more awake than he'd been in his entire life. The moonlight didn't reach underground, but Naruto didn't need it. He'd been finding his way in the dark for 14 years. He knew how to navigate by feel. Miles away, in a windowless office beneath the streets of Konoha, Shimura Danzo read a report from a route operative stationed on the northwestern perimeter. A tripwire activation, Sector 7, attributed to wildlife. Standard, unremarkable, logged and filed. Danzo read it twice. He pulled a second file from his desk, a thin folder marked with a spiral symbol that the rest of the village would have recognized as the Uzumaki clan crest. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a time-stamped entry. Subject observed entering apartment at 22:00. Lights extinguished at 22:47. No anomalies. Danzo looked at the tripwire report again. Sector 7. Northwest approach. He made no notes, drew no conclusions. Simply placed both reports side by side on his desk and stared at them with his one visible eye, the other hidden behind bandages that concealed things the village was not meant to know about. "Fu," he said. A figure materialized from the shadows behind his chair. No sound, no displacement of air. Just suddenly present, like a photograph developing in the dark, Lord Danzo. Increase observation frequency on the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Passive surveillance only, I don't want him alerted. Time frame, indefinite. Fu vanished. Danzo sat alone in his windowless office and thought about foxes and snakes and the particular danger of discarded things that learned to bite. Chapter 2. Teeth in the dark. Anko woke to the sound of running water and the smell of nothing. That was what hit her first, the absence. No street noise bleeding through thin walls, no neighbor's radio crackling at 5 in the morning, no damp rot smell from the building's ancient plumbing. Just stone and silence, and the faint mineral scent of underground water moving through rock. She lay still for 10 seconds, the way she'd been trained, eyes closed, breathing unchanged, cataloging her environment through sound and sensation before announcing she was awake. Hard mattress beneath her, military surplus by the feel of it. A wool blanket that smelled like storage, not use. Cool air, maybe 15 degrees, the kind of constant temperature you got deep underground where the seasons couldn't reach right. The facility, the kid. The insane, reckless, terrifying decision she'd made 8 hours ago while half-drunk in a bar without a name. Anko opened her eyes and stared at a concrete ceiling she didn't recognize. And for the first time in years, she didn't immediately wish she hadn't woken up. That was new. She swung her legs off the bed and took stock. The room was small, 4 meters by 3, roughly, with bare concrete walls and a single overhead light that buzzed faintly when she found the switch. Naruto had furnished it with the bare essentials. The bed, a footlocker, a rack for weapons and gear, and a mirror mounted on the back of the door that she suspected was salvaged from a civilian bathroom because it had a small chip in the corner and a faded price sticker on the frame. She caught her reflection and paused. She looked like hell. The bruise on her jaw had turned that particular shade of greenish-yellow that meant it was healing but wanted everyone to know about it. Her hair was a mess. The short purple spikes she maintained more out of habit than vanity, sticking in directions that defied geometry. Her eyes were bloodshot from the shachu and the sleepless run through the forest. She also looked, she realized with something like surprise, alert, engaged. Like someone who had somewhere to be, she found a basin of water on the footlocker, cold but clean. Washed her face, tied her hair back. Checked her weapons, 2 kunai, 6 senbon, a coil of wire, a single smoke bomb she kept in her coat's inner pocket for emergencies. She'd left Konoha with what she'd been carrying. No pack, no preparation. Just the clothes on her back and the instinct that had told her. In the moment, Naruto Uzumaki had extended his hand across that bar table. That the worst possible outcome of saying yes was still better than the guaranteed outcome of saying no. The hallway outside her room was lit by the same buzzing overhead fixtures. She followed it toward the sound of movement and found the training chamber. Naruto was already there. He was standing in the center of the room, shirtless, running through a taijutsu form she didn't recognize. Not academy standard. Not any style she'd seen in Konoha's dojos or training manuals. The movements were sharp and angular, built around sudden shifts of direction, feints that collapsed into strikes that collapsed into evasions, each transition flowing into the next without pause. His feet barely made sound on the concrete floor. His breathing was controlled, rhythmic, almost meditative. He was also covered in scars. Anko leaned against the doorframe and watched, keeping her expression neutral while her mind processed what she was seeing. The scars were old, most of them anyway. Thin white lines on his ribs and back, the kind left by blades rather than claws. A cluster of circular marks on his left shoulder that she recognized instantly as cigarette burns. And on his stomach, visible as he twisted through a spinning elbow strike, the elaborate spiral of the seal, dark lines radiating outward from his navel in a pattern so complex, it hurt to look at directly, like staring at a puzzle that had too many pieces. He'd been beaten. Regularly, by the look of it. Probably as a child, probably by villagers who saw the fox instead of the boy. She'd known in the abstract, everyone in Konoha knew in the abstract, that the Jinchuriki's childhood had been rough. But knowing and seeing were different things. She filed the anger away for later. It wouldn't help either of them right now. Your right elbow drops when you transition from the cross step to the reverse strike, she said. Naruto stopped mid-form, turned to face her. If he was embarrassed about being seen shirtless, about the scars, about the seal, he didn't show it. How much does it drop? About 4 centimeters, enough that anyone with decent reaction time could get under it and drive a knee into your floating ribs. Show me. Anko pushed off the doorframe and walked onto the training floor. She didn't stretch, didn't warm up, didn't hesitate. She stepped into his space, mirrored his stance, and ran through the transition he'd been practicing. Slowly at first, then at speed. See. The cross step puts your weight on your front foot. When you reverse, your center of gravity has to travel here to here. She demonstrated, exaggerating the motion. That travel time is when the elbow drops, because your body is compensating for the weight shift. You need to initiate the reverse from the hip, not the shoulder. Hip drives the rotation, shoulder follows, elbow stays locked. She ran through it again. This time, the elbow held. Naruto watched with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable, not the way a student watched a teacher, but the way a weapon watched a hand that might pick it up. Total focus. Zero distraction. He copied the movement, got it wrong, copied it again. Closer. Third time, he nailed it, hip rotation driving the transition, elbow locked, the reverse strike landing where it should at a speed that was, she had to admit, impressive for someone his age. Better, she said. Again. He ran it 50 times without being asked. She corrected him twice more, small adjustments to foot placement and wrist angle. By the 50th repetition, the form was clean. Where did you learn that style? She asked, when he finally stopped and reached for a water canteen he'd left by the wall. The fox. It's a combat form that was used by a group of monks in the Land of Iron about 300 years ago. They developed it to fight armored samurai. The emphasis on sudden direction changes was designed to exploit gaps in plate armor. It's not designed for fighting other shinobi. No. That's why I need you. He drank, wiped his mouth. What would you change? She thought about it. The form assumes your opponent is standing still or advancing in a straight line. Shinobi don't do that. We move in 3 dimensions, we substitute, we clone. You need to build in responses for vertical evasion and replacement techniques. Also, the strikes are all lethal targeting, throat, temple, heart, spine. That's fine for assassination, but in a prolonged engagement, you'll burn through your stamina chasing killing blows when you should be accumulating damage. So teach me. That's not a weekend project, kid. Then it's a good thing we have time. Anko crossed her arms and studied him. He stood there, water canteen in one hand, scars on full display, radiating a calm patience that no 14-year-old should have possessed. She'd trained with Jonin, who had less composure. "All right," she said. "Let's see what I'm working with. Come at me." "What are the rules?" "Don't kill me." "Other than that, do whatever you want." He set the canteen down. She watched him settle into his stance, that angular, unfamiliar form, weight low, hands open. He'd listened to her correction about the hip rotation. Good. He learned fast. He also, she noted, didn't attack immediately. A lot of young fighters, a lot of experienced fighters, heard "come at me" and charged. Naruto stood still and watched her the way she'd seen predators watch prey through tall grass. Assessing. Measuring, looking for the opening. She didn't give him one. 10 seconds passed. 20. The training chamber was silent except for the hum of the lights and their breathing. Anko kept her posture relaxed, her weight evenly distributed, her hands at her sides. She looked like she was waiting for a bus. She was actually in a state of total readiness, every muscle primed to fire, her peripheral vision tracking his center of mass while her direct gaze held his eyes. Naruto moved. He was fast. She'd known he would be from watching him run through the forest, but the straight-line speed she'd seen last night was different from combat speed. He closed the distance between them in 2 steps and threw a combination that started with a jab to her chin and ended with a sweeping kick to her front knee, the whole sequence taking maybe 1.5 seconds. She slipped the jab by turning her head 3 centimeters to the right. Let the kick glance off her shin. His technique was good, but he didn't have the mass to make it count against someone braced for it. Stepped inside his guard and drove her palm into his sternum. He flew backward 4 meters and hit the ground rolling, converting the impact into a backward somersault that brought him to his feet. Not bad recovery. She'd hit him hard enough to crack a normal person's breastbone, and he'd absorbed it like a training dummy. Jinchuriki durability. That was going to make sparring interesting. "Telegraphed," she said. "Your jab was clean, but your eyes went to my chin before your fist did. At my level, that's like sending me a written invitation." He came again. Faster this time, the angular style mixing with something more instinctive, raw aggression channeled through the form structure. Each strike flowing from the last with that hip-driven rotation she'd taught him 5 minutes ago. He was already integrating corrections into live combat. The learning speed was almost frightening. Anko deflected, parried, sidestepped. She wasn't trying to hurt him, not yet. She was reading him, building a map of his tendencies, his habits, his gaps. He favored his right side. His groundwork was weak. He was a striker, not a grappler. His footwork was excellent for a genin, but needed refinement for the kind of close-quarters engagement that defined real assassination work. And he had a tell she doubted he knew about. A micro-expansion of his pupils just before he committed to a power strike, the fox's chakra surging reflexively when he put everything into a blow. She let the exchange go on for another 30 seconds, then ended it. She caught his wrist on a cross-hook, redirected the momentum, and took him to the ground with a sacrifice throw that put her on top with her knee on his chest, and a kunai she'd drawn mid-technique pressed against his throat. The whole thing took about 2 seconds from the moment she decided to finish it. Naruto lay on the concrete floor with the kunai's edge against his skin and looked up at her with an expression of pure, focused fascination. "Again," he said. "In a minute. First, tell me what you did wrong." "I overcommitted to the cross-hook, left my wrist exposed on the follow-through." "That's what I exploited. What did you do wrong before that?" He thought about it. She watched him think, watched his eyes move, the gears turning behind them. "I didn't control the distance. I kept closing to striking range, but I wasn't accounting for your grappling. Once I'm inside your reach, you have options I don't." "Good. What else?" "I don't know. You fought angry." He blinked. "I wasn't angry. Not emotionally, mechanically. Your combinations were all aggression, attack, attack, attack. No defensive structure, no bait-hand counter, no patience. You were trying to overwhelm me, which works great against someone slower than you and is suicide against someone who isn't." She pulled the kunai back and stood, offering him a hand. He took it. You fight like someone who's been training alone. Every technique is built around the assumption that you're the only variable that matters. That's not how real fights work. How do real fights work? They're conversations. You say something, they respond. You read the response, you adapt. Right now, you're shouting into a room and hoping nobody answers. I need you listening. Something shifted in his expression. Not defensiveness, she'd been braced for that, the teenage ego flaring up at criticism. Instead, she saw him take the feedback and slot it in, like a piece being placed on a board. Show me, he said. She showed him. They trained for 6 hours. Anko couldn't remember the last time she'd trained for 6 consecutive hours with anyone. Not since Orochimaru, actually. And that comparison made her stomach clench, so she pushed it aside and focused on the work. The kid was a sponge. That was the most accurate description she could come up with. He absorbed everything she threw at him, processed it, and began applying it at a speed that made her reassess every assumption she'd had about what was possible for a 14-year-old. His body wasn't ready for all of it. He lacked the muscle memory that came from years of repetition, and his frame was still adolescent, still growing, which meant some techniques simply wouldn't land with the force they needed until he added another 10 or 15 kilos of muscle. But his mind was ready. His pattern recognition was extraordinary. She could demonstrate a 3-part combination once, and he'd have the sequence memorized. Twice, and he'd start spotting the variations. 3 times, and he'd be adapting it. She taught him the basics of snake-style close quarters, not the jutsu, not yet, just the movement philosophy. Stay low. Stay close. Don't give them room to think. The snake doesn't give its prey space, it constricts. She taught him how to turn a punch into a grab into a lock into a break. She taught him the pressure points she'd memorized from Orochimaru's medical texts, the places where a finger strike could paralyze a limb or a palm strike could stop a heart. In return, he showed her things that made her head spin. The shadow clones were the obvious one. He could produce hundreds, and each one fought with his full skill set, which was a force multiplier that no other technique in the shinobi world could match. But it was the subtler applications that fascinated her. He demonstrated a technique he called echo training. He'd create a clone, have it observe while he practiced a new technique, then dispel it and receive the clone's external perspective on his own movement. Essentially, he could watch himself train from the outside and correct in real time. It was the most efficient solo training method she'd ever seen, and it explained how a kid with no teacher had gotten as good as he had. He also showed her his sensory abilities, the fox's chakra extending outward in a web of awareness that could detect movement and chakra signatures within a significant radius. It wasn't as refined as a dedicated sensors, but it was always on, always running in the background. He described it as a feeling of warmth, warm spots where living things were, cold spots where they weren't. How far? She asked, toweling sweat off the back of her neck. Depends on how much I push. Passively, maybe 200 meters. If I really concentrate, I can get it to 500 or 600. But it's not precise at range. I can tell something's there, not what it is. That's still better than most sensor types in Konoha's active roster. I know, but it has limitations. Strong chakra signatures are easy. I could feel your curse mark from across the village. Weak signatures blur together, and anyone with serious suppression training can slip through. Root operatives, for instance, their chakra masking is good enough to beat passive detection. Yeah. Anko sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, and stretched her legs out in front of her. Her muscles ached in that satisfying deep tissue way that meant she'd actually worked. When was the last time that had happened? So we can detect most threats at range, but not the most dangerous ones. That's a problem. That's why I need your detection skills, too. Last night, the tripwire, you spotted that from 60 meters in low light. I missed it completely. That's experience, not talent. I've been running nighttime forest operations since I was 15. You learn to read the environment or you step on something that kills you. She paused. I can teach you that. The field craft, the environmental awareness, It'll take months, not days, but you clearly have the aptitude. And the curse mark? The question landed in the space between them with the weight of something much heavier than words. Anko's hand went to the back of her neck. That unconscious gesture she couldn't stop making, fingers pressing against the skin where the mark sat like a coal that never quite cooled. What about it? Naruto sat down across from her, cross-legged, his expression serious. You said you felt it flare during training. I saw you flinch during the 4th sparring round, the one where I caught you with the body shot. Your right hand clenched, and you hesitated for about half a second before you countered. She hadn't realized he'd noticed. She hadn't even realized she'd done it. It responds to pain, she said carefully, and to strong emotion, anger, fear, excitement, anything intense. Orochimaru designed it that way. The mark feeds on what you feel. The stronger the emotion, the more power it offers. The more power you take, the more it spreads. Spreads how? She pulled the collar of her coat down, showing him the mark. 3 black tamo arranged in a circle on the curve of her neck, the skin around it slightly discolored, faintly purple, like a bruise that had never fully healed. When it activates, the pattern extends. Flame-like marks spread across the skin. The further they spread, the more power the curse mark is providing. Stage 1 covers about half the body. Stage 2, she pulled her collar back up. I've never gone to stage 2. Orochimaru told me it would either kill me or transform me, and I didn't want to find out which. Kakashi's seal, the containment he put on it during the Chunin exams. How well does it hold? Kakashi put a seal on it. She frowned, then understood. You're thinking of the future. The exam hasn't happened yet. You're a genin, but you know about it. I know about a lot of things that haven't happened yet. The fox's time perception is non-linear, and I've had clones gathering intelligence on Chunin exam procedures for months. He waved that aside. But the seal question stands. Containment seals for curse marks, how effective are they? Temporary. Kakashi's evil sealing method, or anything similar, works by creating a barrier around the curse mark that's powered by the host's willpower. The mark pushes, the barrier pushes back. It reduces the involuntary activations and suppresses the physical symptoms, but it doesn't address the root cause. Which is, the mark is a piece of Orochimaru, not metaphorically, literally. His chakra, his will, his intent, encoded into a biological seal and injected through the bite. It's inside me, part of my chakra network. Trying to remove it with conventional sealing is like trying to remove a vine by cutting the leaves. The roots are still there, and they'll grow back. Naruto was quiet for a moment. She could almost see him processing, cross-referencing what she'd told him with whatever fragmentary knowledge the fox had provided. The Uzumaki were seal masters, he said slowly. The best in the world, supposedly. The fox has given me pieces of their techniques, fragments, incomplete, but the underlying theory is. He paused, searching for words. Conventional sealing treats the target as a static object. You put a box around it. Uzumaki Fuinjutsu treats the target as a living system. You don't contain it, you redirect it. Change its nature. You're talking about reprogramming the curse mark? I'm talking about understanding it first. The mark is a seal, a complex one, but still a seal. And every seal has a language, a logic, a set of rules it follows. If I can read that language, I can find the points where it can be altered. He met her eyes. I'm not going to promise you a timeline. I'm not going to tell you I can definitely do it. What I'm telling you is that I will study it every day until I either succeed or exhaust every possibility. That's not a promise. That's a statement of fact. Anko looked at him for a long time. The training chamber was quiet around them, their breathing the only sound. Sweat cooled on her skin. Her muscles ached. The curse mark pulsed faintly, as it always did when she thought about it too hard, a low throb like a second heartbeat in the wrong place. Nobody's ever tried to help me with it before, she said. She hadn't meant to say it. The words came out before the filter caught them, raw and unguarded in a way she couldn't afford to be. She looked away. Forget I said that. No, excuse me. I'm not going to forget you said that, because it matters. His voice was quiet but certain. The village had 24 years to help you. They had access to the best medical minds, the best SEAL specialists, an entire infrastructure designed to support its shinobi. And nobody tried. Not because they couldn't, because you weren't worth the effort to them. That's not a failure of capability. That's a failure of character. And it's the same failure that left me eating expired food from dumpsters until I was 8 because nobody thought the Jinchuriki deserved a meal. The words landed like stones. Anko felt them settle into a place inside her that she usually kept locked, a room full of old anger and older grief that she'd learned to wall off, because opening it was too expensive. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she murmured. "We're a pair that's going to be better than anything they imagined we could be." He stood up, offered her his hand the same way he had in the bar. "Now come on. You haven't shown me the snake summoning techniques yet, and I want to understand the mechanics before dinner." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "You don't get snake summoning in an afternoon, kid." "I don't want to summon snakes. I want to understand how the summoning contract integrates with the user's chakra network, because the interface between your chakra and the snake dimension might be structurally similar to the interface between your chakra and the curse mark. If I can map one, it might help me map the other." Anko stared at him. "That's actually not a terrible theory. I have those sometimes. Don't push it." They settled into a rhythm, dawn, physical conditioning. Naruto's stamina was effectively unlimited thanks to the Kyuubi's regeneration, but his raw strength and flexibility needed work. Anko ran him through the same brutal calisthenics routine that Orochimaru had used on her, minus the psychological torture, plus a level of genuine investment in the student's well-being that she was carefully not thinking too hard about, mourning. Taijutsu. She broke down her snake-style combat into components and rebuilt it for his body type and fighting instincts. He was taller than her, not by much, not yet, but he would be, and his natural inclination was toward explosive, linear attacks. She needed to teach him to curve, to coil, to think in spirals rather than straight lines. It was like teaching a hawk to swim. The instinct fought the instruction, and she had to find ways to make the new movement patterns feel natural rather than imposed. He was, she had to admit, an incredible student. Not because he was naturally gifted, he was, but she'd trained with natural talents before, and raw talent without discipline was just a different kind of waste. What made Naruto exceptional was his efficiency. Every correction she gave, he implemented. Every drill she assigned, he completed and then asked for the next one. He didn't complain, didn't bargain, didn't take shortcuts. He trained the way a starving person ate, with a desperate, focused intensity that suggested he understood, on some bone-deep level, that this was the difference between survival and oblivion. Afternoon. Ninjutsu theory and tactical discussion. This was where Anko's experience became most valuable, and where she found herself, to her surprise, genuinely enjoying the work. Naruto's theoretical knowledge was astonishing. The fox's memory bleeds had given him a foundation in chakra theory that rivaled what she'd learned in years of study. But theory without context was academic, and he had no context. He'd never been on a real mission. He'd never fought an opponent who was genuinely trying to kill him. He'd never experienced the chaos of a battlefield where plans disintegrated and instinct was the only thing that kept you breathing. She gave him context. She told him about her missions, the real ones, not the sanitized reports she filed. The assassination in the Land of Rain, where her target had been a 13-year-old poison specialist who'd killed 6 people and was 2 days from killing 30 more. The infiltration in Grass Country, where she'd spent 3 weeks pretending to be a civilian herbalist while mapping an enemy compound, and the extraction had gone wrong. And she'd fought her way out through 11 Chunin-level guards with a dislocated shoulder and no weapons. The time Orochimaru had sent her alone into a tomb complex beneath a ruined castle, and she'd spent 4 days in the dark, dealing with traps and summons and the slow creeping certainty that her teacher had sent her there to die. Naruto listened to everything. Asked questions that were always precise and sometimes uncomfortably perceptive. And occasionally, Rarely, but occasionally, he'd say something that made her realize he wasn't just learning from her stories. He was building a model of her. Understanding how she thought, how she reacted under pressure, what her instincts defaulted to when planning failed. He was learning Anko the same way he learned techniques. By observation, analysis, and integration. It should have been unsettling. It was a little. But it was also the first time in years that anyone had considered her worth studying. Evening. They ate together, usually something simple from the facility's stockpiled rations, and talked about things that weren't training. This part had started awkwardly. Two people who'd spent most of their lives alone didn't default to casual conversation. But Naruto, she discovered, was genuinely curious about the world in a way that his village idiot persona would never have suggested. He asked about places she'd been, people she'd known, foods she'd eaten in countries he'd only seen on maps. And in return, he told her things about himself, carefully, in small doses, like someone who'd never had the experience of being listened to and wasn't sure how much was safe to share. He told her about the first time the fox had spoken to him. He'd been 9, huddled in his apartment after a particularly bad day. He didn't describe what had happened, and she didn't ask. And a voice had rumbled up from somewhere below his consciousness, a sound like the earth itself cracking open. It had said one word, stand, not kindly, not gently. The way you'd speak to a dog that was in your way. He'd stood, and the fox had said nothing else for 3 months. He told her about discovering the shadow clone technique, not the way the academy told it, some heroic moment of breakthrough. He'd been desperate. He'd been failing, and a scroll he shouldn't have had access to had presented a technique that his massive chakra reserves were uniquely suited for. The first time he'd created a clone and felt its experience merge back into him when it dispersed. He'd understood, with the blinding clarity of someone seeing the sun for the first time, that he would never be helpless again. He told her about the day he'd found out about his father, and his voice went very quiet, and Anko didn't say anything for a long time afterward. On the 4th night, she told him about Orochimaru. Not the public version, the cautionary tale, the warning about genius gone wrong, the villain in the history books. The real version, the man who had been, for 5 years of her childhood, the closest thing she'd had to a parent. He was brilliant. She said, and she hated how the word still carried warmth when she said it about him. Not just talented, brilliant. He saw things in the world that nobody else could see. Connections, patterns, possibilities. When he taught me, it felt like... She searched for the right words. Like the world was bigger than I'd thought. Like there was more to everything. He'd look at a jutsu and see 12 things wrong with it and 6 ways to make it better, and he'd explain it so clearly you felt stupid for not seeing it yourself. But he looked at people the same way he looked at jutsu. As systems, things to optimize, things to take apart and reassemble. I didn't understand that when I was 12. I thought he cared about me. I thought... She stopped, breathed. He didn't. I was an experiment. The curse mark, the training, the attention, it was all data collection. When I stopped being useful, he threw me away. And the worst part isn't that he did it. The worst part is that a piece of me is still waiting for him to come back and tell me it was all a test, and I passed, and he's proud of me. She said it without crying. She'd cried about Orochimaru exactly once when she was 14, the night they'd confirmed he'd defected. She was done crying about him, but her voice cracked on the word proud, and she hated that too. Naruto was quiet. He didn't offer comfort, didn't touch her arm or tell her it was okay or any of the useless things people said when they didn't know what else to do. He just sat across from her on the training room floor, cross-legged, and waited until she was ready to look at him. When she did, his eyes were hard, not with anger, with certainty. He was wrong about you, Naruto said. He was wrong about what you were worth. And every day we spend here, every technique you master, every mission we complete, that's proof. Not for him. He doesn't deserve the satisfaction of being proven wrong. For you, Anko swallowed, nodded, didn't trust herself to speak. They sat in silence for a while, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happened between people who understood each other's damage well enough to know when words were a waste. On the 5th day, Naruto left before dawn. Anko woke to an empty facility and a note on the kitchen table written in his sharp, precise handwriting. Clone maintenance. Back by noon. Don't destroy anything while I'm gone. N. She spent the morning training alone, running through forms in the underground chamber, pushing herself harder than she had in months. Her body was responding to the sustained effort in ways she hadn't expected. Muscles that had atrophied from disuse were waking up. Neural pathways she'd let go dormant were firing again. She felt, for the first time in a long time, like a weapon being sharpened rather than a weapon being stored. The curse mark pulsed twice during training. Both times she stopped, breathed through it, and waited for it to settle. Naruto had been studying it every evening, making notes, comparing the seal's structure to Uzumaki Fuinjutsu principles, asking her detailed questions about how it felt from the inside. He was meticulous, patient, and genuinely interested in a way that was completely different from the clinical detachment of the medical nin who'd examined her in the past. Those examinations had always felt like being a specimen under a lens. Naruto's research felt like someone trying to understand a problem that mattered to them personally. She was running through a snake-style combination, a low sweep into a rising palm strike that transitioned into a coiling grab when she felt it, a presence. Faint at the edge of her awareness, like a cold draft from a door that shouldn't be open, she stopped. Every sense went sharp. The training chamber had no windows, she was underground, surrounded by concrete and stone, but the ventilation shafts connected to the surface, and she could feel air moving through them in patterns she'd already memorized. The pattern had changed. Something was disrupting the airflow in the upper shaft, the one that opened onto the forest floor 60 meters above her. Something was up there. Anko moved without thinking. Weapons in hand, coat on, she ghosted through the corridor to the facility's secondary exit, a narrow maintenance tunnel that Naruto had shown her on the first day, leading to a concealed opening on the hillside 200 meters from the main entrance. She climbed the tunnel in silence, pressed herself against the wall near the exit, and listened. Forest sounds. Bird calls normal ones. She'd cataloged the local species over the past 5 days. Wind in the canopy, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and footsteps. 2 sets. Moving carefully but not silently, professional enough to avoid snapping branches, not professional enough to mask their footfalls on leaf litter. About 40 meters from her position, heading northeast, toward the main entrance. Anko slowed her breathing, pressed herself into the shadows of the tunnel mouth and watched. 2 figures emerged from the tree line. Both wore dark clothing, not quite uniforms, but coordinated, the kind of matching gear that suggested organizational affiliation. Both carried weapons openly, tanto on the back, kunai holsters on both thighs. One was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the heavy confidence of a taijutsu specialist. The other was smaller, quicker, head on a constant swivel, scanning the environment. Neither wore headbands. The smaller one stopped, raised a hand, the halt signal, crouched and examined something on the ground. Anko couldn't see what from her position, but she could guess. The trail she and Naruto had left 5 days ago when they'd arrived. They'd been careful, but no approach was perfect, and 5 days of rain and wind hadn't been enough to erase every trace. The smaller figure stood and pointed, toward the concealed main entrance. Anko evaluated. 2 unknowns, probable Chunin level or above, tracking her and Naruto's position. Not Anbu, the gear was wrong. Not Root operatives moved differently, with that eerie mechanical precision that came from emotional conditioning. These 2 moved like experienced field operatives, but they had tells. The big one shifted his weight to his left side, favoring an old injury. The small one kept touching the tanto on his back, a nervous habit. She could take them. Easily. The question was whether she should. If they were scouts, there might be more behind them. If they were part of a larger force, engaging now would alert the rest. but if she let them find the entrance, the facility was compromised. The decision made itself. Anko bit her thumb and pressed it to her forearm. A snake, not Midori, a different one, larger, dark-scaled, materialized around her wrist. She whispered instructions. The snake slithered away, vanishing into the undergrowth with a speed that made it look like a shadow moving on its own. 30 seconds later, the big one stopped. Turned. His hand went to his tanto. "Did you hear that?" he said. His voice carried in the still forest air another mark of someone who wasn't truly elite. Real operators didn't speak on approach. The small one shook her head. "Just an animal. Focus." "I thought I saw." The snake struck from below, sinking fangs into the big one's ankle through the gap between his sandal and his shin guard. He went down with a choked yell, his leg buckling as the venom hit. Not lethal, not from this species, but fast-acting paralytic that would spread from the bite point to the knee in about 8 seconds. The small one reacted well, spun, drew her tanto, dropped into a defensive stance. She was looking at the ground, at the snake, trying to assess the threat. She should have been looking at the trees. Anko dropped from the canopy like a stone, silent, her coat flaring behind her. She landed on the small one's back, driving her face first into the dirt, and had a kunai against her throat before the woman could process what had happened. "Don't move," Anko said conversationally. "Your friend's leg is going to be numb for about 6 hours, so he's out. You've got a blade at your carotid artery, so you're out too. Let's have a chat." The woman beneath her was breathing hard, her body rigid with the tension of someone who knew exactly how close to death she was. We're not here to fight. We're scouts, just scouts." "Scouts for who?" Silence. Anko increased the pressure of the kunai, not cutting, not yet, but making the promise very clear. "I'm going to ask one more time, and then I'm going to start removing fingers. Scouts for who?" "Gato." The word came out in a rush. "Gato Corporation. We were hired to survey this region, possible supply route for a new operation in the land of rivers. We detected unusual chakra residue in the area and were sent to investigate. That's all. We're just hired trackers." Anko filed the name. Gato, she knew the name. A shipping magnate who fronted as a legitimate businessman while running a criminal empire that stretched across 3 countries. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. His operations were technically outside Konoha's jurisdiction, which meant nobody bothered to deal with him. "How many in your team?" "Just us. We're the advanced scouts. The main survey team is 3 days behind us." "How did you detect the chakra residue?" "Sensor seals. Passive detection arrays that Gato's people set up along the border region months ago. They flagged an anomaly in this sector. Concentrated chakra underground." Naruto's training. The Kyubai's chakra, bleeding through during sparring, radiating upward through the rock and soil. They'd been leaving a signature without knowing it. "Your sensor seals," Anko said. "Where are they?" I can show you. On a map there. You'll show me. And then you're going to tell me everything you know about Gato's operations in this region. Every route, every cache, every contact." She leaned close to the woman's ear. "And if I find out you've lied to me about any of it, I will find you. I'm very, very good at finding people." The woman nodded frantically. Anko secured them both. Zip ties on the wrists. Paralytic venom snake coiled around the big one's torso as a living restraint, standard field interrogation positioning. She worked quickly and efficiently, the muscle memory of a dozen intelligence operations clicking into place like it had never left. By the time Naruto returned at noon, dropping through the main entrance with the quiet efficiency she was starting to expect from him, Anko was sitting on a rock outside the facility with a hand-drawn map spread across her knees and 2 unconscious prisoners tied to a tree. He stopped. Looked at the prisoners, looked at the map, looked at her. "I was gone for 6 hours," he said. "Things happened. I can see that. They're Gato Corporation scouts, hired trackers. They detected our chakra signature through a network of passive sensor seals that Gato has set up along the border region." She held up the map. "I have the locations of every seal in a 50-kilometer radius. I also have patrol routes, supply cache coordinates, and the name of Gato's regional contact." Naruto walked to the tree, crouched in front of the unconscious prisoners, and studied them for a moment. Then he looked back at Anko with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. It took her a second to identify it, impressed. You interrogated, secured, and mapped their entire operational footprint in 6 hours by yourself. I told you I was good at this. You told me, I believed you, this is better than I imagined. He stood, brushing dirt off his knees. Gato. He's on my list, has been for months. His supply network feeds into half the criminal operations in the Land of Fire's border region. Taking him down would disrupt. I'm not done. Anko folded the map and tucked it into her coat. The woman said their sensor seals flagged concentrated chakra in this area. That's us, Naruto. Our training is producing a detectable signature. The Kyuubi's chakra is bleeding through the rock. He went still. She saw him process the implication. Their safe house, the hidden facility he'd spent months building, was broadcasting their location to anyone with the right detection equipment. We need countermeasures, he said. We need more than countermeasures. We need suppression sealing on every surface of the training chamber. Floor, walls, ceiling, something that absorbs or redirects the chakra bleed so it doesn't radiate to the surface. She paused. Can you do that? Use Uzumaki suppression arrays. The Fox has given me pieces. I'd need to adapt them for the Kyuubi's specific chakra frequency, which is going to take trial and error. Maybe a week. Then we don't train underground until it's done. Surface work only in rotating locations, never the same spot twice. She nodded toward the prisoners. What do we do with them? Naruto looked at the two unconscious figures. His expression didn't change, but Anko could feel the calculation happening. The cold, practical assessment of risk and benefit that she recognized because she'd done it herself 100 times. Memory suppression jutsu, he said. I can't perform one strong enough to be permanent, but I can blur the last 24 hours. They'll wake up confused, missing time, unable to remember specific details. We relocate them 30 kilometers south, near a civilian road. They'll find their way back to Gato's people with a gap in their report and no explanation for it. And Gato becomes our first mission. Anko felt something ignite in her chest. Not the curse mark, something warmer, something that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten it could burn. Purpose, direction, the feeling of looking at a problem and knowing you had the skills, the resources, and the partner to solve it. When? She asked. I need the week for the suppression arrays anyway. During that time, I'll put clones on intelligence gathering, Gato's operation in this region, his security, his vulnerabilities. You map the sensor seal network using the coordinates you got. We find the gaps, plan the approach, and execute. You're talking about taking on one of the wealthiest criminal organizations in the Eastern continent, with 2 people. 2 people and a few hundred shadow clones, and a snake summoner, and a Jinchuriki, and whatever else we figure out between now and then. He smiled, that small, real smile she'd seen once in the bar. I told you, I don't do things small. You don't do things sane, either. Sanity is overrated. It's never done much for either of us. She laughed. It still surprised her, every time, the sound coming out easier, less ragged, more like something a person who was okay might produce. All right, kid, let's go make trouble. That night, after the prisoners had been relocated and the sensor seal map had been memorized and destroyed, Anko sat alone on the hillside above the facility and watched the stars come out. The forest was quiet. Not the oppressive quiet of a room where you were alone with your thoughts, the living quiet of a world that was going about its business without requiring anything from her. Insects hummed. An owl began its nightly hunting pattern. The wind carried the smell of pine and the faintest trace of distant rain. The curse mark pulsed. She put her hand over it, pressing down as if she could hold it in place by force. Shut up, she muttered. I'm not in the mood. It pulsed again. It didn't care about her moods. She heard Naruto before she saw him, intentionally, she suspected. He was too quiet when he didn't want to be heard. The fact that she caught the soft crunch of his footsteps on the pine needles meant he was announcing himself. He sat down beside her, a respectful distance away, and tilted his head back to look at the sky. Can't sleep? He asked. Don't want to yet. The stars are better up here. They are. A pause. In the village, you can barely see them. Too much light pollution. When I was with Orochimaru, we spent months in places where the sky was completely clear. Deserts, mountain passes, the open sea. She caught herself, stopped. The old reflex, don't talk about Orochimaru, don't let anyone see that those years weren't all horror, that some of the memories were beautiful in ways that made the betrayal worse. But Naruto didn't flinch at the name. Didn't tense, didn't go cold. He just listened. He used to name the constellations, she continued, quieter. Not the real names, his own names. He'd point at a cluster of stars and say that's the dissected frog, or that's the failed experiment number 17, and I'd laugh, because I was 12, and I thought my teacher was the funniest person alive. Was he? He was the loneliest person alive. I didn't understand that until much later. All that brilliance, all that power, and he couldn't connect with a single living thing. That's why he wanted immortality, not because he was afraid of death. Because he was afraid of running out of time to figure out how to feel something. She hadn't meant to say that either. Something about the dark, the quiet, the presence of someone beside her who wouldn't judge. It was loosening things she'd kept sealed for years. I think about him sometimes, she said. Not with love, not with hate, with, I don't know, something that doesn't have a name. Like phantom pain from a limb that was never really there. Naruto was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like someone placing stones on a path. The fox told me something once. About Orochimaru, it said he was a creature of infinite appetite and no stomach. That he consumed everything, knowledge, power, people, because he was trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled. The fox said the void wasn't in his mind or his heart, it was in his nature. He was born incomplete. Born incomplete, Anko repeated. That's a kinder way to put it than most people manage. The fox isn't kind, it's accurate. There's a difference, she snorted. Your demon fox is a philosopher. My demon fox is a 900-year-old being of concentrated hatred that occasionally says things that make me rethink everything I believe. It's disorienting. Anko looked at him. In the starlight, he looked younger than he usually did, the sharp edges softened, the calculated intensity dimmed. He looked like a kid. A tired, lonely, extraordinary kid who'd built himself an empire out of shadows and determination, and was still, underneath it all, a 14-year-old sitting on a hillside looking at the stars. Naruto. Yeah, thank you. He turned to look at her. She could see him wanting to deflect, to make it tactical, to fold it into the mission, to keep it safe. She watched him stop himself. You're welcome, he said simply. They sat together on the hillside for another hour, not talking, watching the stars move across a sky that felt bigger than it had a week ago. The curse mark pulsed once more, faintly, and then went quiet, as if, for the first time in years, it had nothing to feed on. Miles away, in Konoha, the shadow clone that wore Naruto's face walked through the morning market with a grin that never reached its eyes. It bought milk and instant ramen. It waved at a shopkeeper who didn't wave back. It arrived at training ground 8 minutes late, which was early by Kakashi's standards. Sakura was sitting on the bridge railing, reading a medical text she'd borrowed from the library. She looked up when the clone approached. You're early, she said, surprised. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get a head start. On what? Kakashi-sensei won't be here for another hour. The clone shrugged and sat down on the bridge, dangling its legs over the stream. It performed the gesture exactly as the real Naruto would have, loose, carefree, slightly restless. The behavioral pattern was thorough. Sasuke arrived 10 minutes later, walking with his hands in his pockets, and his gaze fixed on some middle distance that contained nothing but his own ambitions. He glanced at the clone and said nothing. The clone glanced back and grinned. Everything was normal. Kakashi arrived 90 minutes late with an excuse about a black cat and a detour. The clone laughed at the excuse the way the real Naruto would have laughed, loud and annoyed, and just a little bit fond. Nobody noticed anything. Across the village, in his underground office, Danzo read the morning surveillance report on the Jinchuriki. Subject followed normal routine. No anomalies detected. He placed the report in his file. He did not look satisfied. A new report had arrived that morning from a different source. 2 scouts employed by the Gato Corporation had been found wandering a civilian road south of the border, disoriented, missing approximately 24 hours of memory. Their last confirmed location had been the forest sector, where, 5 days prior, a routine tripwire had been triggered and attributed to wildlife. Danzo placed the 2 reports side by side. He added a third, a chakra anomaly detection flagged by one of his own sensor operatives, a faint but unmistakable signature of concentrated Biju chakra in the deep forest northwest of the village, 3 data points. Individually meaningless. Together, the beginning of a shape. Torun, he said. A figure materialized. Different from Fu, shorter, wearing dark glasses beneath his mask, his hands covered in gloves that concealed the poisonous insects living beneath his skin. Assemble a 4-person reconnaissance team. Specialists, sensor type, tracking type, combat type, and a SEAL specialist. Deploy more actions. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 3. The Orchid and the Knife, the border town of Hakajio, sat at the edge of the land of fire like a tooth about to fall out of a rotting mouth. 2 main streets crossed in the center, lined with buildings that had been repaired so many times the original construction was invisible beneath layers of patchwork wood and mismatched plaster. The kind of place that thrived on being overlooked. Too small to interest the daimyo's tax collectors, too remote for Konoha's patrols, and perfectly positioned at the intersection of 3 trade routes that carried goods, both legal and otherwise, between fire country, river country, and wind country. Naruto had been watching it for 4 days through the eyes of shadow clones transformed into various unremarkable people. A traveling merchant, a day laborer, a teenage boy with a stutter who'd been hired to sweep the floors of the town's only inn. Each clone lived its cover, built its routine, gathered its intelligence, and dispersed on schedule to send the accumulated knowledge flooding back into Naruto's mind in a rush of fragmented sensory data that he'd learned to sort the way a librarian sorted books. By relevance, urgency, and emotional weight. By the 4th day, he had a complete picture. The weapons dealer's name was Enshu. He operated out of a compound on the northern edge of town. A converted sake brewery with walls that had been reinforced with steel plating, and a basement that, according to the clone who'd gotten a job delivering rice to the kitchen, extended 3 levels underground. The compound housed between 15 and 20 guards at any given time, a rotating mix of hired mercenaries and missing nin of varying skill levels. Enshu himself was a former chunin from Takagakure who deserted 12 years ago and built a remarkably successful career turning stolen military hardware into profit. His current operation was the reason Naruto and Anko were here. Over the past 6 months, Enshu had been funneling explosive tags, modified kunai launchers, and, most critically, a shipment of chakra disruption grenades to a group that Naruto's intelligence network had identified as planning an assassination attempt on the land of Fire's daimyo. The group was small, fanatical, and funded by interests in the land of Earth who stood to gain from political chaos in Fire Country. The weapons were the key. Without Enshu's hardware, the group was a collection of angry ideologues with no capacity to act. With it, they were a genuine threat. Konoha's intelligence division knew about Enshu. They'd known for years. But Enshu was careful. He maintained relationships with contacts in multiple villages, traded information as readily as weapons, and had made himself just useful enough to the right people that taking him down was always more trouble than it was worth. The file on him in Konoha's archives was thick and growing and entirely academic. Naruto didn't have that problem. He didn't answer to committees. He briefed Anko on the roof of a farmhouse 2 kilometers south of town, as the sun went down and the sky turned the color of a bruise. She sat cross-legged on the tiles, studying the hand-drawn map he'd assembled from his clone's observations, her eyes tracking the layout of the compound with the focused attention of someone who'd been planning assaults on fortified positions since before he was born. "Guard rotations?" she asked. 3 shifts, 8 hours each. The changeover happens at midnight, 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. The midnight transition is sloppy, the night crew comes on drunk about half the time, and there's a 90-second window where the eastern wall has no coverage. 90 seconds. That's tight. It's enough. The eastern wall backs onto an alley between the compound and an abandoned grain storehouse. The alley is dark, unmonitored, and the wall has a section where the steel reinforcement doesn't extend to the top. They ran out of material and patched it with wood. "I can get through the wood in about 20 seconds. Anko traced a line on the map with her finger. "And once we're inside, the compound has 2 floors above ground and 3 below. Enshu's office is on the 2nd floor above ground. He conducts business there during the day and sleeps in a room adjacent to it at night. The weapons stockpile is on the 3rd basement level, behind a sealed door that requires a chakra key Enshu keeps on his person. So we need him alive long enough to open the door. Yes, after that we destroy the stockpile, deal with Enshu and extract." "Deal with," Anko repeated. She looked at him. "Be specific." Naruto met her gaze. This was a conversation they'd had 3 times during the planning process, and each time he'd found a way to redirect it. She wasn't letting him redirect anymore. Enshu's operation doesn't end if he goes to prison. He has contacts, resources, contingencies. He'll be back in business within a year, operating through intermediaries. The only way to permanently shut down this pipeline is to remove him from it. "You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about eliminating a threat that can't be eliminated any other way." Anko didn't blink. She held his gaze, and he held hers, and the evening air cooled around them while the weight of what he'd said settled into the space between them. "Have you ever killed anyone?" she asked. "No. I have 37 confirmed, probably more some missions you don't get a body count." She set the map down. "It changes you. Not in the way people think. There's no dramatic moment, no before and after line. It's more like erosion. Each one takes something small away, and you don't notice it's gone until you look back and realize the landscape is different." "Are you telling me not to do this?" "I'm telling you to understand what you're choosing. You're 14. You've built something extraordinary, this network, this operation, this whole shadow infrastructure. And right now, it's clean. Nobody's died for it. The moment that changes, it changes permanently. There's no going back." Naruto looked out at the town. The lights were coming on, one by one, windows glowing amber in the dusk. Somewhere down there, people were eating dinner, putting children to bed, living ordinary lives that depended on a stability they took for granted. A stability that men like Enshu eroded every day, one weapons shipment at a time. "You're right," he said. "I haven't killed anyone. And I don't want to. But wanting doesn't change the math. If Enshu stays alive, people die. Not theoretical people, real ones. The daimyo's guards, the civilians caught in the blast radius, the political fallout that could drag the entire land of fire into instability. I weighed that against one man's life, and the math isn't close." "Math." Anko's mouth twisted. "You sound like Danzo." The name landed like a slap. Naruto flinched, actually flinched, the first time she'd seen his composure crack since the night in the bar. "Don't compare me to him." "Then don't think like him." Danzo uses the same argument: necessary sacrifices, acceptable losses, the greater good. It sounds rational, it sounds clean, and it turns people into weapons that don't ask questions. She leaned forward. "I'm not saying Enshu doesn't deserve to die, he probably does. I'm saying that if you do this, you do it with your eyes open. You feel the weight of it, you carry it. The day it stops weighing something is the day you've become what you're trying to fight." Silence. Then Naruto exhaled, long and slow, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "Okay," he said quietly. "I hear you, and I'll carry it, but we're still doing this." Anko studied him for another moment. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it because she nodded and picked the map back up. Then let's do it right. Walk me through the interior layout again. They went in at midnight. The eastern wall was everything Naruto's clones had promised. Dark alley. No guards, wood-patched section at the top where the steel ran out. Anko went over first, clearing the wall with the silent, practiced ease of someone who'd been infiltrating enemy compounds for a decade. Naruto followed, less graceful, but just as quiet, his movements powered by chakra control that compensated for what he lacked in experience. They dropped into a narrow courtyard between the outer wall and the main building. The air smelled like machine oil and old alcohol, the ghost of the brewery the compound had been before Enshu had converted it. 2 guards stood at the building's rear entrance, 40 meters away, half visible in the light from a lantern mounted above the door. One was smoking. The other was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, head tilted back, possibly asleep on his feet. Anko held up 2 fingers. Pointed at her eyes, then at the guards. I see them. Naruto formed a single hand sign, and a shadow clone materialized in the darkness beside him, identical, silent, already moving. The clone circled wide, keeping to the shadows along the base of the wall, and positioned itself behind a stack of crates 20 meters from the guard's position. The clone threw a stone. It clattered against the ground on the far side of the courtyard, away from both the guards and Naruto's actual position. The smoking guard turned. The sleeping guard jerked awake. Both drew weapons and moved toward the sound, not together, which was sloppy, but in the same general direction. Anko moved. She crossed the 40 meters in something under 3 seconds, staying low, her footfalls perfectly silent on the packed earth. She reached the sleeping guard first, a precise strike to the nerve cluster at the base of his skull, her fingers finding the exact point with the casual confidence of a musician hitting a familiar note. He went down without a sound. The smoking guard heard his partner hit the ground and started to turn, but Anko was already behind him, her arm around his throat in a chokehold that cut blood flow to the brain. He struggled for about 4 seconds, then went limp. She lowered him to the ground and signaled. Clear. They entered through the rear door. Inside, the building was a maze of converted spaces. The old brewing equipment had been removed, but the infrastructure remained. A network of catwalks and overhead pipes and narrow corridors that had been repurposed into storage rooms and living quarters. The lighting was inconsistent, bright in some areas, pitch dark in others, with the kind of uneven coverage that made it simultaneously easy to hide and easy to stumble into someone unexpectedly. Naruto took point, his sensory web extended as far as he could push it. Warm spots, living presences, dotted the building like stars on a map. Most were clustered on the ground floor in what his clones had identified as the guards' barracks. A few were scattered through the upper levels. And on the second floor, in the room his intelligence placed as Enshu's office, a single presence burned brighter than the rest. Not brighter because of more chakra. Brighter because the chakra felt wrong. Dense, compressed, with an edge of something cold and methodical that Naruto associated with trained operatives rather than common mercenaries. He held up a fist. Anko stopped beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint metallic scent of the senbon she carried, the poison-coated ones she kept in a sealed pouch inside her coat. Second floor, he whispered. The office, but the chakra signature is different from what my clones recorded. Enshu's chakra was mid-range, unremarkable. This is, trained, disciplined. Anko's eyes narrowed. Someone else is up there. Someone else is up there with Enshu or instead of him. Trap, maybe, or a meeting we didn't know about. He closed his eyes, pushing the sensory web harder. The warm spot on the second floor was stationary, seated, probably. Alone, no other signatures within 15 meters, one person, but the wrong person. We adapt, Anko murmured. Objective 1 is the weapons stockpile. We don't need Enshu for that if we can get the chakra key off him or off whoever's up there. Objective 2 is intelligence. If someone unexpected is in that office, I want to know who and why before we act. Naruto nodded. The plan had been built with contingencies, but contingencies were theory, until you needed them. This was where Anko's experience became the difference between a successful operation and a catastrophe. They moved upward through a service stairwell that ran along the building's western wall. Narrow, dark, the stairs old enough to creak if you stepped wrong. Anko led, placing her feet with a precision that came from years of muscle memory, finding the solid points on each step by instinct. Naruto followed in her footsteps, literally, stepping where she stepped, trusting her judgment over his own, second floor. A corridor lined with doors, most closed, the lighting reduced to a single fixture at the far end that cast more shadows than illumination. The office was the third door on the right, closed, no light visible beneath it. Anko pressed herself against the wall beside the door and produced a thin needle from her coat, not a weapon, a tool. She slid it through the gap between the door and the frame, angling it upward, using it as a mirror to see a sliver of the room beyond. She held the position for 5 seconds. Then she withdrew the needle, and Naruto saw something change in her face, a tightening around the eyes. A set to the jaw that he'd learned to associate with Anko processing information she didn't like. She leaned close to his ear. Her breath was warm against his skin. "It's a root operative," she whispered, seated at Enshu's desk, alone. "Enshu's not here. The office has been cleared of personal effects. This isn't a meeting. Root got here first." The words hit Naruto like cold water. Root, Danzo. Here, in a border town that Naruto had spent weeks preparing to hit, sitting in the office of the man he'd planned to eliminate. Not a coincidence. Danzo had his own intelligence on Enshu, his own interest in the weapons pipeline, and he'd acted first, not to destroy the operation, but to take it over. The root operative in that office wasn't there to shut Enshu down. He was there to assume control of the supply chain and redirect it to serve Danzo's purposes. That was how Danzo worked. He didn't eliminate threats, he acquired them. "Do we abort?" Naruto asked, barely audible. Anko was quiet for a moment. He could see her running calculations, risk, reward, the cascading implications of every possible choice. Then she shook her head. "We don't abort. We adjust. The stockpile is still down there. Root wants the pipeline, not the hardware. The hardware is a means to an end. If we destroy the stockpile, we cripple the operation without directly confronting Root. Danzo loses his new toy but can't prove we were here. And the operative, we avoid him. The basement levels have a separate access point. My clones mapped a service elevator in the northeast corner of the ground floor. We go down, find the stockpile, destroy it, and get out before anyone upstairs knows we were here." It was the smart play, the careful play. The play that preserved their anonymity and accomplished the primary objective without escalating into a confrontation they weren't prepared for. Naruto almost took it. Then the door opened. The root operative stood in the doorway, 6 feet away, and looked directly at them. He was young, maybe 18, with a face that had been trained into perfect blankness. Dark eyes that reflected nothing. A short sword on his back, standard root issue. Pale skin, dark hair cropped close to his skull. He wore no headband and no expression. Unidentified personnel. He said, his voice flat and uninflected. "Corridor 2, second floor. State your Anko hit him. It wasn't a technique. It wasn't a planned maneuver." It was 10 years of combat instinct compressed into a single explosive movement. Her body uncoiling from its position against the wall. Her hand striking the operative's throat with the edge of her palm before he'd finished his sentence. He staggered backward into the office, and she followed him in, and Naruto followed her, pulling the door shut behind them. The operative recovered faster than he should have. The throat strike should have collapsed his airway. It was a killing blow, delivered with full force by a Tokubetsu Jonin who knew exactly where to aim. But the operative's neck was protected by a thin layer of something that Naruto's sensory web identified as compressed chakra armor, a root defensive technique that hardened the skin at the point of impact. The blow had hurt him. He was wheezing, one hand at his throat, but it hadn't stopped him. He drew his tanto in a single fluid motion and attacked. The office was small, 4 meters by 5, dominated by a heavy wooden desk and lined with shelving. Bad terrain for a fight. The operative used it well, keeping the desk between himself and Anko, forcing her to navigate the furniture while he slashed at her from angles that exploited the confined space. His technique was efficient, mechanical, and completely devoid of emotional tells. The textbook root combat style that traded creativity for relentless precision. Anko was better. She vaulted the desk, clearing it in a motion that turned into a diving kick that caught the operative's guard and drove him into the shelving. The shelves collapsed. Scrolls and documents scattered. The operative rolled clear, came up with his tanto extended, and thrust at her midsection. She wasn't there. She dropped low under the thrust, and her hand came up with a senbon between her fingers, one of the poisoned ones, the tips glistening faintly in the dim light. She drove it into the gap between the operative's armor plates, just above the hip, and the venom went to work. The operative felt it. A flicker of something crossed his blank face, not pain, not fear, but the clinical recognition that a variable had changed. He pulled the senbon out, but the poison was already in his bloodstream. His movements slowed. Not dramatically, Root trained for poison resistance, but enough. His tanto strikes lost a fraction of their speed, and a fraction was all Anko needed. She came inside his guard, neutralized the tanto hand with a wrist lock that bent his arm to the breaking point, and drove her knee into his solar plexus. He folded. She caught him on the way down, controlled the fall, and pinned him with her weight on his back and her forearm across the base of his skull. The whole thing had taken about 12 seconds. Naruto stood by the door, where he'd been since the fight started. He hadn't intervened. Not because he couldn't, because he didn't need to. Anko had handled it with a speed and efficiency that left no room for assistance. She looked up at him from her position on the operative's back, not even breathing hard. "Shut the door properly," she said, "and check if anyone heard." He sealed the door with a privacy jutsu, one of the Uzumaki techniques the fox had provided, a sound suppression barrier that turned the room into a sealed box. Then he extended his sensory web through the building. The warm spots on the ground floor were undisturbed. Nobody had heard. Clear. He said. Anko turned her attention to the operative beneath her. He was conscious, the paralytic venom slowing his body but not his mind. His dark eyes stared at the floor with that characteristic Root emptiness. "Name," Anko said, silence. "Designation, then. Root operatives have designations." More silence. Anko increased the pressure on his neck, not enough to break anything, enough to make the threat clear. "I don't have patience for the stoic routine. I've interrogated Root operatives before. I know the conditioning, I know the protocols. I know about the seal on your tongue that prevents you from talking about Danzo directly. I'm not asking about Danzo. I'm asking about you. Name or designation." The operative's jaw worked. The tongue seal, Anko had mentioned it during their briefings. A cursed seal that Danzo placed on every Root member, preventing them from revealing information about him or the organization. It activated when the subject attempted to speak about restricted topics, paralyzing the tongue and, in extreme cases, the entire body. But she hadn't asked about restricted topics. She'd asked for a name. "Sai," the operative said. His voice was strained from the throat strike and the paralytic, but clear. "Sai. All right, Sai. Where is Enshu?" "Eliminated. 3 hours ago." Naruto felt the floor shift under him. Not physically, but that sensation of a plan crumbling, the architecture of a carefully constructed operation collapsing into rubble. Enshu was dead. Root had killed him, which meant, "The chakra key," he said. "For the basement vault. Where is it?" Sai's eyes shifted to him for the first time. Something moved behind the blankness, a flicker of assessment, of calculation. The operative was reading him the way Naruto read other people, and the realization was deeply uncomfortable. "The key is in my possession," Sai said. "I was to secure the stockpile for transport." "Transport where?" Silence. "The tongue seal, probably." The destination was a restricted topic. Anko shifted her weight. "When's the transport team arriving?" "Dawn." Naruto looked at Anko. She looked back at him. Dawn was less than 5 hours away. If a root transport team arrived and found their operative subdued and the stockpile compromised, the situation would escalate beyond anything they could manage. Danzo would know someone had interfered. The investigation that followed would be thorough, relentless, and backed by the full resources of Root's intelligence apparatus. They had 5 hours to destroy the stockpile and disappear. "The key," Anko said to Sai. "Give it to me." "I cannot. Can't or won't. The key is bound to my chakra signature. It will not function for another user." Anko looked at Naruto. He saw the question in her eyes. Can we force him to use it? He thought about it. Dragging a paralyzed Root operative through a weapons compound full of mercenary guards, forcing him to open a secured vault, then destroying the contents and extracting cleanly, all before dawn. The logistics were nightmarish. The risk was enormous. But the alternative was leaving the stockpile intact for Danzo to claim. "We take him with us," Naruto said. "Down to the vault. He opens it. We destroy everything inside. Then we deal with the Sai problem." The Sai problem being a trained Root operative who will report everything he's seen to Danzo the moment we let him go. "I'm working on that part." Anko's expression suggested she had opinions about that answer, but she didn't voice them. She hauled Sai to his feet. The paralytic had reduced his mobility to a stumbling walk, which made him manageable if not cooperative, and they moved. The service elevator was where the clones had mapped it. A freight platform in the northeast corner, operated by a mechanical pulley system rather than chakra, which meant it was slow but silent. Naruto went first, sensory web extended, scanning for guards. 2 on the first basement level, both stationed at the corridor junction. He created clones, 2 of them, transformed into the guards they'd incapacitated at the rear entrance, and sent them down the corridor from the opposite direction, calling out a shift change. The guards, confused but compliant, moved to investigate. The corridor cleared, they descended. Second basement level, storage mostly empty, the racks cleaned out by what Naruto assumed was Root's preliminary operation. Third basement level, the vault door was massive. Reinforced steel, set into concrete, with a seal array carved into the surface that pulsed with a faint blue light. Military-grade security, probably imported from Iwagakure based on the seal design. Sai stood before it, swaying slightly from the paralytic. Anko kept a hand on his shoulder and a kunai against his ribs. "Open it," she said. Sai pressed his palm against the seal array. His chakra flowed into it, a specific pattern, a specific frequency, the key that Enshu had coded to himself and that Root had recoded to their operative after eliminating him. The seal pulsed, recognized and disengaged. The door swung open with a groan of heavy metal. The stockpile was everything Naruto's intelligence had suggested and more. Crates stacked floor to ceiling, filling a room the size of a large house. Explosive tags in sealed containers, thousands of them. Kunai launchers disassembled and packed in wooden cases. Smoke bombs, flash grenades, wire traps. And in the far corner, in a separate sealed container marked with hazard symbols, the chakra disruption grenades. 40 of them, each one capable of creating a localized field that scrambled chakra control in a 10-meter radius for up to 30 seconds. In the hands of the assassination team targeting the daimyo, they would have been devastating. Anko let out a low whistle. That's enough hardware to equip a small army. That was the idea. Naruto was already moving, assessing the room's layout, calculating the most efficient method of destruction. Explosive tags are the obvious tool, use the stockpile to destroy itself, but the detonation would be massive. It would level the compound and probably take out a city block. Too much collateral. Way too much. There are civilians in this town, he thought. Fire techniques would work but take too long. We'd need to melt through the sealed containers individually. Water would neutralize the explosive tags but not the hardware. Sealing, Anko said. He looked at her. You said Uzumaki Fuinjutsu can redirect and transform. What about containment? Seal the entire stockpile into a storage scroll, a big one, but still a scroll. We take it with us, transport it to a safe location, and destroy it on our terms. It was brilliant. It was also technically demanding. Sealing this volume of material would require a containment array larger than anything Naruto had attempted. But the theory was sound, and he had the chakra to power it. "I need 20 minutes," he said, "and a lot of floor space." "You've got the floor space." "I'll watch the door." Anko positioned herself at the vault entrance, Sai propped against the wall beside her, and settled into a guard stance that told him everything he needed to know about her state of readiness. Relaxed posture, sharp eyes, every muscle primed to fire. Naruto pulled a blank scroll from his pack, the large format, designed for supply sealing, and went to work. The containment array was based on a fragment the Fox had given him 6 months ago, a piece of Uzumaki sealing architecture that dealt with the storage of volatile materials. The original technique had been designed for sealing Biju-level threats, which was overkill for a weapons cache, but the underlying structure scaled down cleanly. He drew the array on the vault floor in ink mixed with his own blood. The Uzumaki preferred blood ink for precision work, something about the way living chakra conducted through organic material, working in quick, confident strokes that belied the complexity of what he was creating. 15 minutes. The array covered most of the floor, spiraling outward from a central point in interlocking patterns that hummed faintly as he charged them with chakra. Each line was a channel, each node was a gate, and the whole structure functioned as a funnel, drawing physical material inward and compressing it into the dimensional pocket contained within the scroll. He placed the scroll at the center of the array, formed 4 hand seals, and pushed. The Kyubai's chakra surged through him, not the red, violent eruption of combat use, but a controlled, sustained flow, deep blue at the edges and burning gold at the core. The array lit up. The ceiling lines flared. And the stockpile began to move, crates sliding inward, compressing, folding into the scroll with a sound like a massive inhalation. It took 3 minutes. When it was done, the vault was empty. The scroll on the floor was warm to the touch and significantly heavier than it should have been, but intact. Naruto picked it up and tucked it into his pack. "Done," he said. Anko glanced back at the empty vault, then at him. "You just sealed an entire armory into a piece of paper." Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. That's not normal sealing. I've seen storage scrolls used by Supply Corps. They can hold maybe a ton of material. You just sealed about 40 tons, give or take. He allowed himself a small smile. The Fox's knowledge isn't always practical, but when it is, it really is. Remind me never to get on your bad side. You're on the only side I have. Let's move. They turned to leave, and that was when the curse mark activated. Anko felt it like a detonation behind her eyes, a surge of dark chakra that erupted from the mark on her neck and raced through her nervous system in a wave of heat and static. Her vision blurred. Her muscles locked. Every nerve ending in her body fired simultaneously, and for one terrible second she was back in Orochimaru's laboratory, 12 years old, screaming while something bit into her neck and injected a poison that felt like liquid fire. She staggered, hit the vault wall, slid down it until she was sitting on the concrete floor, her hand clamped over the back of her neck, her teeth clenched so hard she heard them creak. Anko, Naruto, was beside her. She could hear him but couldn't see him. Her vision had narrowed to a tunnel of black and purple, the curse mark's chakra superimposing itself over her senses like a second layer of reality. "Anko, talk to me. What's happening?" "Mark," she managed. "Activated. Something triggered it." Not pain, not fear, not the usual emotional catalysts. This was different. This was external, the mark responding to a stimulus from outside her body, like a radio picking up a signal, like a summons. "He knows," she gasped. "Orochimaru, the mark is a beacon. He can feel me through it. He knows I'm here. He knows I'm breathe." Naruto's voice cut through the static, sharp and clear. His hands were on her shoulders, and she could feel his chakra, warm, steady, the Kyubai's energy held in check like a banked fire. "Focus on my voice. The mark feeds on your emotional state. You told me that. If you panic, it gets worse. Breathe. she breathed, in, out, in, out. The mark pulsed with each heartbeat, and she could feel it trying to spread, the flame-like patterns creeping across her skin beneath her coat, reaching for her shoulder, her collarbone, her jaw. Stage 1. The first threshold of transformation. "I can feel him," she said, and her voice shook. Not his thoughts. His attention. Like a searchlight swinging toward me. He felt the mark activate, and now he's looking. He's looking for me. Naruto's expression went through several changes in rapid succession: alarm, calculation, decision. He pulled his hands from her shoulders and formed a sequence of hand seals she didn't recognize. His chakra shifted, the Kyubai's energy rising to the surface, and he pressed his palm flat against the back of her neck, directly over the curse mark. Heat. Not burning, the deep, penetrating warmth of a summer sun through closed eyelids. His chakra flowed into the mark's pattern, not fighting it, not trying to suppress it. Instead, it wrapped around the mark's signal like a hand closing around a candle flame, containing the light, muffling the broadcast, the searchlight feeling faded. The mark spread slowed, then stopped, the flame patterns receding back toward the original point on her neck. Anko gasped as the pressure eased, her vision clearing, the tunnel of black and purple collapsing back to normal sight. Naruto held his palm against her neck for another 10 seconds, his face tight with concentration. Then he pulled away. "I didn't stop it," he said. "I muffled it." Wrapped the Kyubai's chakra around the mark's outgoing signal and scattered it. If Orochimaru was listening, all he got was a burst of static where a clear signal should have been. "It'll buy us time, but not much." Anko was still breathing hard. The residual pain of the mark's activation throbbed through her neck and shoulder, a dull ache that she knew from experience would take hours to fade. "How did you do that?" she asked. "The fox. Biju chakra has a different frequency than normal chakra. It's noisier, more chaotic. It interferes with structured signals the way a storm interferes with radio transmission. I've been theorizing about using it as a disruption tool for the curse mark, but I hadn't tested it until now." "You tested an untried technique on my cursed seal in the middle of an enemy compound." The alternative was letting Orochimaru pinpoint your location. She wanted to argue. She couldn't. He was right, a sound from the corridor outside the vault. Footsteps. Multiple sets moving fast. The fight in the office, the elevator, the chakra surge from the ceiling, something had finally attracted attention. Sai, still propped against the wall, spoke. "Compound alert. The guards have been activated. You have approximately 2 minutes before this level is sealed." Anko looked at Naruto. He looked at her. No time for planning, no time for careful coordination. Just instinct and trust and the partnership they'd been building for 2 weeks. "Up and out," Naruto said. "Same route, double speed. I'll handle the guards." "The hell you will. I'll handle the guards. You get the scroll out." "That stockpile is the mission." "Anko." "That wasn't a suggestion, kid." She was on her feet, curse mark still aching but her body responding, adrenaline overriding the residual effects. Her hands found the familiar weight of kunai in her holsters. "You've got 40 tons of sealed weaponry on your back. If you go down, we lose everything. I'm the expendable asset on this one. You're not expendable. Tactically, right now I am, and you know it. Go." She turned and moved toward the corridor before he could argue. He watched her go, watched her roll her shoulders, crack her neck, and transform from a woman recovering from a cursed seal episode into something that moved like violence given human form. He went. The compound erupted. Anko hit the stairwell running and met the first wave of guards at the junction between the second and first basement levels. 4 of them, mercenaries, not missing Nin, armed with standard weapons and moving with the herd confidence of men who'd never fought someone who was genuinely trying to kill them. She disabused them of that confidence in about 6 seconds. The first one came at her with a sword. She ducked under it, drove a senbon through his forearm between the radius and ulna, and used his scream as cover to close on the second, who got a palm strike to the sternum that cracked ribs and sent him into the third. The fourth had time to throw a kunai, which she deflected with a casual sweep of her arm and returned with interest. Her thrown kunai took him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and she was on him before he hit the wall, a chokehold that put him down in 3 seconds. She moved up. The first basement level had more guards, 7, maybe 8, some of them actually competent. A missing nin from Aimgakure with water techniques that turned the corridor into a slippery nightmare. A taijutsu specialist who was fast enough to block her first strike and skilled enough to counter her second. Anko fought the way Naruto had never seen her fight, not the controlled, educational sparring of their training sessions. The real thing, savage, efficient, and touched with the particular cruelty of someone who'd learned combat from a man who viewed human anatomy as a puzzle to be disassembled. She targeted joints, nerve clusters, blood vessels. She used the environment, walls, pipes, door frames as weapons. She deployed senbon with a precision that would have made a surgeon jealous, finding gaps in armor and hitting the exact spots where the human body's defenses were weakest. The Aimgakure missing nin caught her with a water bullet that hit her in the ribs and sent her into a wall hard enough to crack the plaster. She bounced off, tasted blood, and responded with a technique she hadn't used in years, the hidden shadow snake hands. Serpents exploded from her sleeves, a dozen of them, each one targeting a different pressure point on the missing nin's body. He tried to block. He got 6 of them. The other 6 got him. The taijutsu specialist lasted longer. He was good, genuinely good, with reflexes that matched her own and a fighting style that favored defensive counters. He blocked 3 combinations, dodged a senbon throw, and actually managed to clip her jaw with a back fist that reignited the bruise she'd been nursing for a week. Anko grinned through the pain. She hadn't fought someone this capable in months. The curse mark pulsed, offering power, offering an edge, and she told it to go to hell and fought clean, closing the distance with a burst of speed that came from pure physical conditioning, trapping his lead hand in a wrist lock that left his centerline exposed, and finishing with a knee to the solar plexus, followed by an elbow to the back of the head as he doubled over. He went down. She kept moving. By the time she reached the ground floor, the compound was in full alarm. Shouts echoed through the corridors. Doors slammed. The remaining guards were mobilizing, trying to establish a perimeter, but they were disorganized. A mercenary force that had relied on the compound's security rather than their own discipline. And now that the security had been breached, they were scrambling. She found Naruto at the rear entrance, exactly where they'd come in. The 2 guards they'd incapacitated earlier were still unconscious, and Naruto had added 3 more to the pile guards who'd responded to the alarm and run straight into a wall of shadow clones that had materialized in the courtyard like a nightmare multiplication. "Clear?" he asked. "Clear enough. We have maybe 90 seconds before someone with actual skill shows up. Then let's not be here." They went over the wall, hit the alley, hit the tree line. And then they were running, moving through the forest at a speed that 8 kilometers like a hungry thing, the compound shrinking behind them into a cluster of lights and shouts that faded with distance until it was just noise, and then nothing at all. They ran for an hour without stopping. Anko's ribs ached where the water bullet had hit her, and her jaw was swelling where the taijutsu specialist had connected. The curse mark pulsed faintly, resentfully, like a dog denied a meal. She ignored it. When they finally stopped, in a clearing beside a stream 20 kilometers from the town, they looked at each other in the moonlight and took stock. Naruto was uninjured. The scroll was intact on his back, 40 tons of weapons, sealed away, removed from Danzo's grasp and Enshu's pipeline in a single night. Mission accomplished. Anko sat down on a rock and pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling for fractures. Bruised, not broken. She'd been lucky. "The root operative," she said. "Sai, we left him in the vault." "I know." He saw our faces. "He knows what we did." "I know that too." And Naruto sat down beside the stream and dipped his hands in the cold water. "I left a shadow clone in the corridor outside the vault." When the guards cleared out and Sai was alone, the clone administered a targeted memory disruption technique, similar to what I used on Gato's scouts, but more precise. It won't erase everything, but it'll blur the details. Faces, voices, specific techniques. He'll remember that someone hit the compound, took the stockpile, and neutralized him. He won't remember who. Will that hold against Root's debrief protocols? Honestly, I don't know. Danzo's people have methods for recovering suppressed memories. If they push hard enough, they might get fragments. He paused. But fragments aren't certainties, and Danzo doesn't act on uncertainties. He waits until he has proof. You hope. I calculate. There's a difference. Anko looked at him. The moonlight caught the water on his hands, making his fingers glint. He looked tired, not physically. The Kyubai's stamina handled that, but the deeper kind of tired that came from carrying too many calculations in your head at once. The curse mark, she said. I know. If Orochimaru felt that activation, he's going to investigate. The signal was scattered, but he'll know the mark was active. He'll know it wasn't in Konoha, and he has resources to follow up that make Danzo's look amateur. I know, Anko. Then what do we do about it? He was quiet for a long time. The stream murmured. An owl called. The forest breathed around them, indifferent to their problems. We accelerate the timeline on the curse mark research, he said finally. I was planning to study it for months, work through the theory carefully, find an elegant solution. We don't have months. We might not have weeks. He looked at her. I need to understand that mark better than Orochimaru does, which means I need access to information I don't currently have. What kind of information? Orochimaru's research notes. The original documentation on the Juin Jutsu, the development process, the seal architecture, the biological interface. Without that, I'm working blind. With it, I can map the mark's structure completely and find the points where it can be disrupted. Orochimaru's research notes are in Orochimaru's possession, in one of his hidden laboratories, behind the kind of security that makes tonight's compound look like an unlocked shed. Not all of them. Naruto's eyes met hers. He had a laboratory in Konoha before he defected. The third Hokage found it and sealed it, but I don't think he destroyed the contents. The old man was sentimental. He couldn't bring himself to erase his students' work entirely. The lab should still be there, sealed underneath the village. Anko's blood went cold. She knew about the laboratory. She'd been inside it. Once, when she was 11, a memory she'd buried so deep it might as well have been in another person's brain. The smell of chemicals, the sound of something breathing in a glass tank. Orochimaru's hand on her shoulder, guiding her through a room full of things that a child should never have seen, his voice calm and scholarly as he explained what he was doing and why it mattered. I know where it is, she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. But getting in would require. Getting past the Hokage seal, I know, that's not a trivial problem. He leaned forward. But Uzumaki Fuinjutsu was the foundation for most of Konoha's sealing protocols. The third Hokage learned his seal work from the second, who learned from the first, who learned from Mito Uzumaki. The seal on that laboratory is almost certainly based on Uzumaki architecture, which means the fox might have the key. Anko stared at him. You want to break into a sealed laboratory underneath Konoha, one that the Hokage himself locked down, to steal research notes from Orochimaru's abandoned experiments, research that's probably the most dangerous classified material in the village, so that you can reverse engineer my curse mark. Yes, while simultaneously maintaining your cover identity, managing the Shadow clone network, and avoiding detection by Root, who are now actively investigating the border region. Yes. And you want to do this on an accelerated timeline because a legendary Sannin may be tracking us through a parasitic seal on my neck. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. Somewhere in the forest, a nightbird sang 3 notes and fell silent. Okay, she said. Okay? I said okay. What did you expect, an argument? She gave him a look that was half exasperated and half something else. Naruto, I've been living with this mark for 12 years. 12 years of being Orochimaru's leftover, his discarded prototype, his failed experiment that's still walking around reminding everyone of what he did. If there's a chance, any chance of cutting this thing out of me, I'll break into every sealed laboratory in every hidden village on the continent." She paused. "But we do it smart, we plan it, we don't rush in because we're scared." "I'm not scared." "I am, and that's fine. Fear keeps you sharp. Panic makes you stupid. There's a difference." She stood, stretched, winced at the pain in her ribs. "We need a safe location to stash the weapons scroll. Somewhere that isn't the facility. If Root or Orochimaru's people are looking for us, the facility is compromised until you finish those suppression arrays. I have a secondary cache. 12 kilometers east, in a cave system I mapped 3 months ago. The scroll will be safe there." "Good. We go there first. Then we go back to the facility, you start on the suppression arrays, and I start mapping our approach to Orochimaru's lab." She looked down at him, sitting by the stream with moonlight on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes and the weight of 40 tons of sealed destruction on his back. "And Naruto?" "Yeah, tonight. The compound, the seal, the way you muffled the curse mark." She touched the back of her neck, where the skin was still warm from his chakra. "Nobody's ever done anything like that for me. You need to know that. Not because I want you to feel good about it, because I want you to understand what it meant." He looked up at her. In the moonlight, the sharp angles of his face softened, and for a moment he looked exactly his age, a boy who'd done something that mattered and wasn't sure how to hold the weight of someone's gratitude. "It meant you're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Neither of us is." She nodded. Didn't trust herself to say more. Turned and started walking east. He followed. The weapons cache was secured by 2 in the morning. The cave system was deep, dry, and accessible only through a narrow fissure in a cliff face that was invisible from more than 5 meters away. Naruto sealed the scroll inside a containment array carved into the cave wall, layered with detection wards that would alert him if anyone approached within 100 meters. They returned to the facility at dawn, moving carefully, alert for any sign of surveillance. The forest was quiet. No tripwires, no sensor anomalies, no warm spots on Naruto's detection web that shouldn't have been there. Root's reconnaissance team, the one Danzo had dispatched, was still somewhere in the sector, but they hadn't found the facility yet. The lack of the suppression arrays made that luck rather than skill, and luck was a resource that expired without warning. Naruto started the arrays immediately. It was painstaking work. Every surface of the underground training chamber had to be inscribed with sealing patterns that would absorb, redirect, and dissipate chakra emissions before they could radiate to the surface. The patterns were based on the Fox's fragmentary knowledge of Uzumaki barrier techniques, adapted and improvised in ways that made Naruto's head ache with the constant calculations. Anko left him to it and went to work on her own project. She sat in her room with a blank sheet of paper and began drawing from memory. The laboratory. Orochimaru's hidden workspace, buried beneath the streets of Konoha in a section of the village's tunnel network that predated the founding. She'd been there once, 12 years ago, but the memory was etched in acid. Every detail preserved with the vicious clarity that trauma imparted. The entrance was in the northeast corner of the village, beneath a building that had been a bathhouse in the first Hokage's era. A staircase concealed behind a wall panel led down to a corridor that branched 3 ways. Left to the living quarters, Orochimaru had maintained for extended research periods. Right to the holding cells where his subjects had been kept, and straight ahead to the main laboratory. The Hokage seal would be on the entrance, the staircase, probably, or the wall panel that concealed it. She drew the layout. Drew it again, correcting details as her memory clarified. Drew it a 3rd time, adding dimensions estimated from the proportions she remembered. By evening, she had a workable map of the laboratory's exterior layout. The interior was less clear. Her single visit had been brief and overwhelming, and the details blurred into impressions. Glass tanks, surgical tables, shelves of scrolls and bottles, the pervasive smell of formaldehyde and something else. Something organic and wrong that she'd never been able to identify. She brought the map to Naruto. He was in the training chamber, covered in ink, the walls around him blazing with sealing patterns that hummed at a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. "Halfway done," he said, not looking up from the section he was inscribing. "Another 2 days for the full array. This can't wait 2 days." She spread the map on the floor beside him. "I've drawn everything I remember about the laboratory, the entrance, the corridor, the branching layout. But there are gaps. I was 11, I was scared, and I was trying not to look at the things in the tanks." He set down his brush and studied the map. His ink-stained fingers traced the corridors, the rooms, the estimated dimensions. "This is good. This is workable." The entrance under the old bathhouse, is the building still standing? It's a storage facility now. Civilian use, low security. The Hawkins people would have sealed the hidden entrance, but not the building itself, too conspicuous. And the seal on the entrance. "You said it would be Uzumaki-derived. Did you see it?" "No, I went in before the defection, when the entrance was open. The Hawkins sealed it after Orochimaru fled. Then I'll need to see it in person. Send a clone in, a transformed one, someone who has legitimate reason to be in the storage facility. Get close enough to the concealed entrance to examine the seal without triggering it. Timeline. I'll send the clone tomorrow, during my maintenance visit to Konoha. It'll take a few hours to get a good look at the seal, analyze the architecture, and determine if the Fox's knowledge can help us get through." Anko nodded. Then she sat down beside him, her back against the wall, and watched him work. The sealing patterns were beautiful in a way she hadn't expected, not just functional but aesthetic, the lines flowing into each other with a grace that suggested the Uzumaki had understood their art as exactly that. An art, Naruto. The compound tonight. You said you'd carry the weight." "Of what we did." He stopped inscribing, looked at her. "I didn't kill anyone tonight," he said. "You didn't kill anyone tonight. The guards are hurt, not dead. Even the Root operative will recover. And Enshu? Root killed Enshu, not us. But we would have. That was the plan. If Root hadn't gotten there first." He set the brush down, sat back on his heels. The sealing patterns hummed around them, filling the chamber with a vibration that felt like a held breath. "Yeah," he said, "we would have. And I'm glad we didn't have to. And I'm not going to pretend that gladness is anything other than relief that someone else made the hard call first." He met her eyes. "I meant what I said, Anko. I'll carry the weight when it comes, but I'm not going to pretend I'm eager for it." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Good," she said. "That's the right answer." She stood, left him to his sealing work, and went to her room. She lay on the military surplus mattress and stared at the concrete ceiling and listened to the faint hum of Uzumaki Fuinjutsu reverberating through the walls of her new home. The curse mark was quiet. For the first time in 12 years, it wasn't the last thing she felt before she fell asleep. The last thing she felt was warmth, the residual trace of Naruto's chakra where he'd pressed his palm against her neck, scattering Orochimaru's signal like a hand waving away smoke. She slept without dreaming. In a hidden laboratory carved into the rock beneath the land of sound, Kabuto Yakushi set down his pen and adjusted his glasses. The monitoring array on the wall before him displayed a map of the eastern continent, dotted with points of light that represented active curse mark signatures. Most were clustered in the land of sound itself. Orochimaru's current experiments, his active operatives, his stored subjects. A few were scattered across other countries, marking sleeper agents and abandoned test subjects whose marks still functioned even if their usefulness had expired. One point, a small, pale light on the border between the land of fire and the land of rivers, had pulsed brightly 2 hours ago and then gone dark, not deactivated. Not suppressed, scrambled. The signal had been there, strong and clear, the unmistakable signature of a heaven's seal in active state, and then something had interfered. Something had wrapped around the signal and scattered it, replacing clear data with noise. Kabuto had never seen that happen before. The curse marks were Orochimaru's masterwork, biological seals that operated on a frequency no conventional technique could jam. Whatever had disrupted this signal was operating on a fundamentally different level. He checked the identifier code against his records. The scrambled mark belonged to Subject 7A. Designation, Mitarashi Anko. Kabuto's pen tapped against his clipboard. Tap, 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 Anko Mitarashi. Orochimaru's first curse mark recipient. The failure, the one who'd survived the application but hadn't developed the power Orochimaru had hoped for. She'd been written off years ago, left in Konoha as a cautionary footnote. Her mark dormant and her usefulness expired. But the mark hadn't been dormant 2 hours ago. It had been blazing, active, powerful, responding to a combat state that suggested its host was operating at a level significantly above her baseline. And then something had silenced it. Kabuto stood and walked to the communication panel on the far wall. He pressed the activation seal and waited. The connection opened. A voice came through, smooth, cold, cultured, like silk being drawn across a blade. Kabuto, it's rather late for a social call. Lord Orochimaru, I apologize for the hour. I have an anomaly report on the curse mark monitoring array. A pause. Which mark? Subject 7A. Mitarashi Anko. A longer pause. When Orochimaru spoke again, the silk in his voice had developed an edge. Tell me everything? Kabuto told him. The activation, the intensity, the scrambling, the unprecedented nature of the interference, silence on the other end. Long enough that Kabuto wondered if the connection had failed. The signal was not suppressed, Orochimaru said finally. Suppression would look different, a dimming, a gradual reduction. This was disruption, active interference by an external chakra source. That's my assessment as well. The interference pattern is consistent with a high-frequency chaotic emission, something that generates enough noise to overwhelm the mark's outgoing signal. Biju chakra. The words hung in the air. Kabuto felt a chill trace his spine, not from fear, exactly. From the recognition that his master had arrived at the same conclusion he had, instantly, and that the conclusion opened doors that led to very dark rooms. It's possible, Kabuto said carefully. The chaotic emission profile is consistent with Biju-level chakra. But to apply it with the precision necessary to disrupt a specific seal without destroying the host would require someone with both access to Biju chakra and knowledge of seal architecture sufficient to target the curse mark's specific frequency. Another pause. Konoha has one Jinchuriki. The Nine-Tails container. The Uzumaki boy. Naruto Uzumaki is a genin. His file indicates below-average academic performance, limited ninjutsu capability, and no documented knowledge of Fuinjutsu. His file, Orochimaru repeated, and the amusement in his voice was thin and sharp as a scalpel. His file was written by people who see what they expect to see. I learned long ago not to trust Konoha's assessments of its own. A sound that might have been a laugh if laughter could cut. A Jinchuriki and my former student. Now that is an interesting combination. Shall I investigate? Yes. But carefully. If the Uzumaki boy has developed the ability to interfere with my curse marks, he's more dangerous than his village realizes and potentially more useful. I want to know everything about him, his real capabilities, his real activities, his real relationship with my little Anko. The amusement deepened. Don't rush, don't alert him, and don't underestimate him. The last person I underestimated was his father, and that cost me rather more than I care to admit. Understood. The connection closed. Kabuto sat down at his desk and pulled out a fresh file. He wrote a name on the cover in his neat, precise handwriting. Uzumaki Naruto, priority reassessment. Then he opened his intelligence network's most recent dispatch from Konoha and began to read. The game had changed. A piece had moved that no one had been watching, and now the board looked different, more complex, more dangerous, and far more interesting than it had been that morning. Kabuto had been Orochimaru's right hand for years. He'd survived by being smarter, faster, and more adaptable than anyone who opposed him. He'd mapped the hidden currents of the shinobi world with a precision that most intelligence agencies couldn't match. But this was new. A Jinchuriki building a shadow network. A discarded kunoichi pulled from the wreckage of her own life and turned into something unexpected. And a curse mark, Orochimaru's leash, his tracking beacon, his claim of ownership on Anko Midarashi's body and soul, being challenged by a power that shouldn't have been able to touch it. Kabuto smiled. It was not a kind smile. He began to plan. Chapter 4. What the fox remembers. The rain started at midnight and didn't stop. It came down in sheets, turning the forest floor into a maze of mud and running water, hammering the canopy so hard the sound was almost physical. A wall of white noise that swallowed footsteps, voices, and everything else. Naruto crouched beneath an overhang of rock 3 kilometers from the facility and watched the world dissolve. He'd finished the suppression arrays 18 hours ago. The training chamber was sealed, every surface inscribed with Uzumaki barrier patterns that absorbed and dissipated chakra emissions before they could radiate to the surface. He'd tested it with a full-power Rasengan against the far wall, then sent a clone to the surface to check for leakage. Nothing. The facility was invisible. That was the good news. The bad news was currently sitting on his chest like a stone, in the form of 3 shadow clone memories that had dispersed simultaneously 20 minutes ago, flooding his mind with overlapping intelligence reports that painted a picture he didn't like. Memory 1. A clone stationed in Hakageo, transformed into a street vendor, had observed a 4-person team moving through the town. They weren't trying to blend in. They wore dark clothing, moved in formation, and asked questions at every establishment about unusual activity in the area over the past week. The questions were specific. Had anyone seen unfamiliar shinobi? Had anyone heard explosions? Had anyone noticed anything strange about the old brewery compound on the north edge of town? They were Root, Danzo's reconnaissance team, the one Torun had been ordered to assemble. They'd arrived in the border region, and they were looking. Memory 2. A clone in Konoha, maintaining the cover identity, had picked up chatter at the mission assignment desk about a missing persons inquiry. Anko Midarashi's name hadn't come up. The cover clone was holding, her routine undisturbed, but someone in the intelligence division had flagged a discrepancy in her recent mission reports. The reports were accurate. The cover clone had been filing them on schedule. But an analyst with more attention to detail than most had noticed that Anko's combat performance assessments had been suspiciously consistent over the past 3 weeks. No variation in technique, no adaptation, no growth. A real shinobi's performance fluctuated. A clone's didn't. Memory 3. A clone positioned on the eastern border of the Land of Rivers had detected an unfamiliar chakra signature moving through the region with deliberate, methodical precision. Not Root. The signature was different, less suppressed, more controlled, like someone who didn't need to hide because they were confident enough in their ability to handle whatever they encountered. The clone had followed at a distance and observed the figure. A woman, tall, dark-haired, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd spent their entire life in the field. She'd stopped at 3 locations that corresponded to points on Naruto's network, supply caches and dead drops that his clones used for intelligence relay. She hadn't disturbed them. She'd just looked. She was mapping him. Naruto pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed. The rain hammered down. The rock overhang dripped. Inside his chest, behind the seal, the Kyuubi stirred like a cat stretching in the dark. 3 threats, the fox observed. Converging, I can count. Can you prioritize? That was the question. Route in Hakageo was dangerous but manageable. They were looking for evidence of the compound assault, not for the facility itself. The intelligence division discrepancy was more urgent. If someone pulled at that thread, the cover clone's disguise would unravel, and Anko's absence would become a crisis. The unknown woman mapping his network was the most immediate threat because she was touching his infrastructure directly. 3 problems. 2 people. Not enough hands. He dropped his palms and stood. The rain soaked through his clothes in seconds, but he barely noticed. The Kyuubi's chakra kept his core temperature stable in conditions that would have given a normal person hypothermia. He turned and moved through the forest toward the facility, running the scenarios in his head, discarding options, building new ones. By the time he reached the concealed entrance, he had a plan. He didn't love it. But he didn't need to love it. He needed it to work. Anko was in the training chamber, working through a kata that made the air hiss with the speed of her movements. She'd been pushing herself harder in the past 3 days. The curse mark incident at the compound had lit something in her. A furious determination to be stronger than the thing Orochimaru had put inside her. She trained with a ferocity that Naruto recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. She stopped when he entered, reading his expression instantly. 3 weeks together had given them a shorthand, a vocabulary of looks and gestures that communicated faster than words. His expression now said trouble. "How bad?" she asked. 3 front bad. He laid it out: root in Hackageo, the intelligence division discrepancy, the unknown woman on his network. He spoke quickly, efficiently, the way she'd taught him to brief during their tactical sessions. Facts first, analysis second, options third. Anko listened without interrupting. She toweled off her face and neck, took a drink of water, and sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, her thinking position he'd learned. "The cover clone," she said. "That's the most time-sensitive. If the intelligence division pulls my file for review, they'll want to interview me. A shadow clone can't survive a face-to-face interrogation with a trained analyst." Agreed. "I need to go back to Konoha and refresh the clone, update its behavioral patterns, add some variation to its performance metrics. Make it messier, more human." That addresses the symptom, not the cause. The analyst who flagged the discrepancy is going to keep looking. We need to give them a reason to stop looking. What kind of reason? Anko's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The kind that involves me showing up in person for a day. Let the analyst see me, the real me, acting normal. File a report that has some personality in it. Maybe pick a fight with someone in the break room, then disappear again while they're still writing up the incident. That's risky. If someone notices you arriving and departing from the village, nobody notices me, Naruto. That's the whole point. I've been invisible in that village for years. One more day of being visible won't raise any flags, it'll lower them. He thought about it. She was right. A brief, controlled reappearance would satisfy the analyst's curiosity and buy them time. But it meant Anko going back to Konoha alone, operating without backup in a village where Root was watching and every shadow might have eyes. "I don't like it," he said. "You don't have to like it. You have to trust me." The words landed with weight. Trust. The thing they'd been building, brick by brick, through 2 weeks of training and 1 night of combat and 100 small moments of honesty that neither of them was accustomed to giving. "I trust you," he said. "What about the other 2 fronts? Root in Hackageo, let them look. They'll find evidence of a breach at the compound, but nothing that points to us specifically. Your memory disruption on Sai will hold long enough to keep the details fuzzy. Root is thorough, but they're not omniscient. Let Danzo waste resources chasing ghosts. And the woman." Anko's expression shifted. "That one I don't like. Someone mapping your network means someone with intelligence-gathering capability that's comparable to yours. That's not random. That's an operator with resources and purpose." She didn't disturb the caches. Didn't take anything, didn't leave anything, just observed. Which means she's not hostile, not yet. She's assessing. Anko stood. "I'll handle Konoha, you handle the woman, find out who she is, what she wants, and whether she's a threat or an opportunity. And if she's a threat, then we deal with it, together, but not until we know." Naruto nodded. It was the right call: divide and conquer, play to their respective strengths. Anko knew Konoha's internal dynamics better than he did. He knew his network better than she did. "Dawn," he said. "You leave for Konoha at dawn. I'll go after the woman at the same time. We rendezvous back here in 48 hours. 48 hours. If one of us doesn't make it back, we both make it back. That's not negotiable." She looked at him for a moment, and something softened in her expression, a flicker of warmth that she hid quickly, burying it under the operational mask she wore when the stakes were high. 48 hours, she agreed. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the sealed training chamber and did something he'd been avoiding for weeks. He went to see the fox. The meditation was familiar: settle the body, slow the breathing, let the conscious mind sink below the surface of awareness until it reached the place where the seal existed. Not a physical place, not exactly, but a space that had weight and dimension and its own peculiar rules. Naruto had been visiting it since he was 9, and it never got easier. The sewer. That's what it looked like. An endless corridor of dripping pipes and standing water, lit by no visible source, stretching in every direction without walls or ceiling to define its boundaries. The water was ankle-deep and warm, which was wrong in ways that had disturbed him as a child, until he'd realized the warmth was his own chakra, suffusing the space like body heat. And at the end of the corridor, behind bars that towered into darkness, behind a seal tag the size of a door pasted across the lock, the Kyuubi no Yoko, the fox, was enormous. That never stopped being the first thing that hit him: the sheer scale of the creature. Its body filling the cage like a bonfire in a lantern, its 9 tails shifting lazily in the darkness behind it. Its eyes were red-orange, the color of lava cooling, each one larger than Naruto's entire body. When it breathed, the air in the corridor moved. Back again, the fox said. Its voice didn't come from its mouth, it came from everywhere, vibrating through the water, the walls, the air. You smell like anxiety. I need information. You always need information. That's the only reason you come here. A sound that might have been a laugh, low and grinding. You never visit just to talk. Do you want me to visit just to talk? The fox's eyes narrowed. Don't be absurd. Then let's skip the small talk. Naruto stood in the ankle-deep water and looked up at the creature that had defined his life since the moment of his birth. The woman on my network, the one mapping my dead drops. I need to know if you've sensed her. I sense everything you sense. Your pitiful web of awareness is a subset of mine. Then you felt her chakra signature. I did. The fox shifted, its massive body rearranging itself behind the bars. Water affinity, strong, disciplined, the kind of control that comes from a lifetime of combat, not a classroom. She carries the smell of sea salt and blood. Kirigakure. Or someone who trained there. The bloody mist produced many skilled killers before it began producing them slightly less enthusiastically. A tail flicked. Her chakra has the particular density of someone who has survived more than they should have. I've felt it before, in warriors, in commanders, in the ones who walk out of battles that kill everyone else. Is she dangerous? Everything that breathes is dangerous if you give it reason. The fox leaned forward, and its breath washed over Naruto, hot, acrid, carrying the ghost scent of things that had burned centuries ago. The more interesting question is why she's mapping your network without disturbing it. A hostile operator would have sabotaged the caches. A rival would have replaced your intelligence with disinformation. She did neither. She observed. Anko said the same thing. Assessment, not aggression. Your snake woman has good instincts. Surprising, given that she was trained by a man with none, the fox settled back. There's something else. Something I've been considering whether to tell you. Naruto waited. The fox's selective sharing of information was a constant frustration. It volunteered knowledge when it served the fox's purposes and withheld it when it didn't. Naruto had learned that pushing rarely worked. Patience occasionally did. The woman's chakra pattern has a secondary layer, the fox said. Faint. Buried beneath the primary signature like a watermark in paper. Most sensors wouldn't detect it. I did, because I'm not most sensors. What kind of secondary layer? A seal. Not an Uzumaki seal, something cruder, less elegant but functional. It's a loyalty binding. Someone put it on her to ensure her compliance, and someone later tried to remove it. The removal was incomplete. The seal is broken but still present, like a scar from a wound that healed badly. A loyalty binding. Kirigakure used them on their hunter-nin divisions during the Bloody Mist era. A seal that compelled obedience to the Mizukage, and through the Mizukage, to whoever held the leash. When the new administration reformed the village, they attempted to remove the bindings from surviving hunter-nin. Many of the removals were imperfect, a former hunter nin from Kirigakure, with a broken loyalty binding that had been imperfectly removed. Operating independently, mapping intelligence networks in the border region between nations, the picture was forming. She's freelance, Naruto said. A former Kiri hunter nin who broke free of the loyalty seal and went independent. She's building her own operation. That would be my assessment. Which makes her either a potential ally or a dangerous competitor, depending entirely on what she wants. I'm going to find out. I assumed as much, which brings me to the reason I hesitated to tell you any of this. The fox's eyes locked onto his, and the weight of that gaze was like standing in a current that could sweep you away. If you confront this woman, you may need to use more of my power than you have before. She is not a genin playing at being dangerous. She is the real thing. And if negotiations fail, I can handle myself. You can handle yourself against the opponents you've faced so far. Mercenaries, untrained guards, a single route operative who was caught off guard. The fox's voice dropped, and Naruto felt it in his bones. This woman has killed people who were better than you. Many of them. Do not walk into that meeting with the arrogance of a child who has never truly been tested. The words stung. They were meant to. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if you need my power, you take it. Don't hesitate, don't ration, don't worry about control. You have been treating my chakra like a dangerous animal you're trying to keep leashed. That's prudent under normal circumstances, but if this woman decides you're a threat, prudence will get you killed. And the cost. The fox was quiet for a moment. When it spoke, its voice was different, not softer exactly, but more measured, as if choosing words with uncharacteristic care. Every time you draw on my chakra beyond your baseline threshold, the seal weakens slightly. Not enough to matter in a single instance. But cumulatively, over time, with repeated use, the barrier between us erodes. Eventually, a point will be reached where the distinction between your chakra and mine becomes unclear. At that point, the question of who is using whom becomes academic. You're saying if I use too much of your power, I'll lose myself. I'm saying the seal was designed by a genius to contain a force of nature, and even genius has limits. Your father built a barrier that would last a lifetime under normal conditions. You have not been operating under normal conditions since you were 9. Naruto stood in the ankle-deep water and looked at the fox, really looked, past the hatred and the ancient rage and the overwhelming physical presence. And he saw something he hadn't expected. The fox was concerned. Not for Naruto, the Kyuubi would have happily watched him die if it didn't mean going down with him, but for the situation. For the escalating cascade of threats and decisions that was pushing them both toward a threshold that neither of them fully understood. I'll be careful, Naruto said. You'll try to be careful, it's not the same thing. The fox closed its eyes. Go, do what you're going to do, but remember what I told you. The seal has limits, so do you, the sewer dissolved. The training chamber materialized around him, concrete walls, humming seal patterns, the smell of ink and stone. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his clothes damp with sweat, his hands trembling slightly. He clenched his fists until the trembling stopped. Then he stood, changed his clothes, packed his operational kit, and went to get some sleep. Dawn was 4 hours away. They separated at the facility's entrance as the first gray light filtered through the canopy. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the forest steamed faintly, mist rising from the wet earth like breath from a sleeping animal. Anko was dressed in her standard Konoha gear, the long coat, the mesh shirt, the headband she'd pulled from her pack and tied around her forehead for the first time in weeks. She looked like she always had. She looked like someone who belonged. 12 hours in the village, she said. I show my face, file a report, start a fight if necessary, and get out. The cover clone disperses when I arrive and reforms when I leave. Don't go to the bar. I wasn't planning on it. I know, I'm saying it anyway. She gave him a look. Worried about me, kid? Always. The word came out before he could filter it. He watched Anko register it, the sincerity, the simplicity, the complete absence of tactical calculation. Something crossed her face that she didn't hide fast enough. Then she punched his shoulder, harder than was strictly necessary, but not as hard as she could have. 48 hours, she said. Don't die. Don't get caught. She vanished into the trees. He watched the space where she'd been for 5 seconds longer than he needed to, then turned east. The woman's trail was 3 days old by the time Naruto picked it up, and it was a masterwork of counter-tracking. She didn't leave footprints. She'd been treated with some kind of chakra technique that reduced her physical impact on the environment to almost nothing. No broken branches, no displaced stones, no scuff marks on bark from tree running. What she did leave was a faint, intermittent chakra trace that Naruto's sensory web could detect only when he pushed it to maximum range and concentrated hard enough to make his temples ache. He followed the trace east into the land of rivers, moving through increasingly unfamiliar territory. The forest thinned as he went, giving way to scrubland and rocky terrain cut through with narrow river valleys. The land was wilder here, less traveled, less mapped, with none of the patrol infrastructure that characterized the Land of Fire's interior. By mid-afternoon, the trail led him to a river gorge. The gorge was deep, maybe 60 meters from rim to water, with walls of dark stone that had been carved smooth by millennia of flowing water. A river ran at the bottom, wide and slow, its surface reflecting the gray sky. On the far side of the gorge, a natural shelf of rock jutted out from the cliff face, forming a platform about 20 meters above the water. The woman was standing on it. She'd been waiting for him. That was obvious from her posture, relaxed, unhurried, facing in his direction with the calm patience of someone who'd known exactly when and where he'd arrive. She was tall, as the clone's observation had suggested, with dark hair cut short in a practical style that suggested someone who didn't waste time on appearance. She wore dark clothing, not a uniform, not quite civilian. Something in between that suggested independent operation. A long sword was strapped across her back, the kind of blade that Kirigakure's Hunter Nin had been famous for. Naruto stopped on the opposite rim of the gorge, 60 meters of empty air between them. He could feel her chakra now, strong, steady, with that secondary layer the fox had described. The broken loyalty seal, still present, still scarring the pattern of her energy, she looked at him across the distance. He looked back. "You followed my trail," she called. Her voice carried across the gorge, clear despite the sound of the river. It was low, controlled, with an accent he couldn't place, not quite Kiri, not quite anything else. "I left it for you, so I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You mapped my network," he called back. 3 dead drops and a supply cache, that felt like an invitation. It was. She shifted her weight, and even at this distance he could read the easy confidence of the movement. "You're younger than I expected. The intelligence suggested a mid-level operative. You look about 14. "I am about 14, a pause. "Interesting. Who are you?" "My name is Simi. I'm formerly of Kirigakure's Hunter Nin Division, 4th Battalion. I've been operating independently for 3 years. "Why are you mapping my network?" "Because you're mapping the same territory I am. Our operations overlap, dead drops, supply routes, information channels. When 2 intelligence networks start bumping into each other in the dark, someone usually gets hurt. I prefer to avoid that." Naruto assessed. The fox's warnings echoed in his mind. "She has killed people who were better than you." But the woman's posture, her tone, her decision to wait in the open rather than ambush from concealment, all pointed toward the same conclusion Anko had drawn. Assessment, not aggression. "You could have sabotaged the caches," he said. "You didn't." "No, I could have replaced your intelligence drops with disinformation. I didn't do that either." She crossed her arms. "I'm not your enemy. I'm not interested in being your enemy. What I'm interested in is understanding what a 14-year-old is doing running a shadow network. That's better than most village intelligence operations I've encountered. That's a lot of interest from someone I've never met. Mutual interest. I'm sure you've already analyzed my chakra signature, identified my origin, and made at least 3 tactical assessments about how this conversation might end." "Am I wrong?" She wasn't wrong. He'd done exactly that, and the fact that she knew it meant she was used to dealing with people who thought the way he thought. I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere that isn't separated by a 60-meter gorge, he said. Agreed. There's a crossing point about 200 meters upstream. I'll meet you at the base of the northern cliff. She moved first, which was either a gesture of good faith or a tactical decision to control the meeting point. Naruto followed along the rim, keeping pace, maintaining his sensory web at maximum extension. No other chakra signatures in range. If she'd brought backup, it was very well hidden. They met at the base of the cliff, where a rockfall had created a natural shelter from the drizzle. Close up, Simi was older than he'd guessed from a distance, mid-30s, maybe, with the lean, weathered look of someone who'd spent more of their life outdoors than in. Her eyes were dark and watchful, and the sword on her back was the real thing, not a decorative weapon, but a tool that had been used and maintained with the focused attention of someone whose life depended on it. She studied him with the same analytical attention he was giving her. 14. She said, running a network this sophisticated, how? I'm resourceful. You're a Jinchuriki. The word landed between them, and Naruto felt his entire body go taut. His hand didn't move toward a weapon. He controlled that instinct, but his chakra shifted, the Kyubai's energy surging to readiness behind the seal. Simi raised a hand. Easy. I'm not going to sell that information, and I'm not going to use it against you. I detected the Biju chakra in your dead drops, residual traces that you probably don't realize you're leaving. Nobody else would catch it. I spent 8 years in Kiri's Hunter Nin division tracking the Three-Tails Jinchuriki before the beast was extracted. I know what Biju chakra smells like. If you know what I am, then you know what happens if you become a threat. Yes, and you know what happens if a former Kiri Hunter Nin decides you're a threat. So let's both acknowledge the capacity for mutual destruction and move on to the productive part of the conversation. Despite everything, the tension, the danger, the fox's warnings hammering in the back of his skull, Naruto felt a flicker of something that might have been respect. This woman was direct in a way that reminded him of Anko. No games, no posturing, just clear-eyed pragmatism. What do you want? He asked. I want to know what you're building, because I'm building something similar and geography has made us neighbors. We can either work together or work against each other, and I've seen enough waste in my life to prefer the former. What are you building? An independent operations network. Intelligence, logistics, and, when necessary, direct action. Focused on the border regions between nations, where the village's official reach doesn't extend, and where threats fester because nobody takes responsibility for them. Naruto stared at her. He was hearing his own mission statement reflected back at him from a stranger's mouth. Why? He asked. Because I spent 20 years following orders from a village that was drowning its own children to produce better killers. Because when the loyalty seal broke and I could finally think clearly, I looked at the world and saw the same pattern everywhere: villages hoarding power, nations drawing lines in the dirt, and ordinary people dying in the spaces between because nobody with the ability to help was willing to look in the wrong direction. She paused. And because I'm very, very good at what I do, and I'd rather use those skills for something that matters than waste them on mercenary contracts. The fox stirred behind the seal. She means it, it said, a low rumble that only Naruto could hear. Her chakra is steady. No deception signatures. Either she's the most skilled liar I've ever encountered or she's telling the truth. Naruto weighed the fox's assessment against his own read. Simi's body language was open, not artificially so, not performed. She stood like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Her hand hadn't gone near her sword since they'd been face to face. You said our networks overlap, he said. Where? 3 locations in the land of rivers, and 2 in the border zone between fire and wind. Supply routes, mostly. We're using some of the same channels without knowing it, which means our operatives are going to trip over each other eventually. When that happens, someone gets spooked, someone gets hurt, and we both lose infrastructure we can't afford to replace. So you want to coordinate. I want to deconflict. At minimum, we share route schedules and operational timelines so we stay out of each other's way. At maximum. She let the sentence hang. At maximum, we cooperate. The border regions are bigger than either of us can cover alone. You have capabilities I don't, your clone network is extraordinary, and your sensory range is unmatched. I have capabilities you don't. Contacts in 3 countries, operational experience in environments you've never worked, and a team of 6 former Kiri operatives who are loyal to me personally. You have a team, small, specialized. All former Hunter Nin, all freed from their loyalty seals, all working independently because they couldn't go back to a village that had broken them. Her eyes met his. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded so familiar it hurt. I need to think about this, Naruto said. Take the time you need. I've been doing this for 3 years. I can wait a few more days. She reached into her jacket and produced a small scroll, which she set on the rock between them. Communication channel. A summoning-linked message drop that connects to my network. Use it when you've decided. She turned to leave, then stopped, looked back at him over her shoulder. One more thing. You have another problem besides me. I detected a 4-person team operating in this sector 3 days ago. Route. They're running a search pattern centered on a point approximately 40 kilometers northwest of here. The facility. They were searching for the facility. How do you know their route? Naruto asked, keeping his voice level. I told you, I tracked the 3 Tails Jinchuriki for 8 years. I know what Konoha's shadow operations look like. These people move like ghosts with no personalities. Route, she paused. They haven't found what they're looking for yet, but their pattern is systematic. At their current search rate, they'll cover the relevant sector in about 5 days. 5 days. The suppression arrays would hide the facility's chakra signature, but the concealed entrance was a physical feature that could be discovered by conventional search methods if the team got close enough. Thank you for the warning, Naruto said. Consider it a gesture of good faith. She nodded once. I'll be in the area. Use the scroll. She walked away along the river's edge, and within 30 seconds, the mist and drizzle had swallowed her. Naruto stood alone at the base of the cliff, the communication scroll warm in his hand, and tried to process everything that had just happened. An ally. Maybe. A genuine, experienced, resourceful ally with her own team and her own network, offering cooperation in a world that had given neither of them any reason to trust, or a trap. An incredibly sophisticated patient trap laid by someone who knew exactly what buttons to push. He couldn't tell. And that uncertainty was either the most dangerous thing about this situation or the most honest. He didn't go back to the facility. Not yet. Instead, he found a sheltered spot beneath a rock overhang. The land of rivers was full of them, the terrain carved into natural shelters by millennia of water, and created 3 shadow clones. You, he said to the first, go to the facility, check the perimeter. If route search pattern is what Simi described, map their progress and project their coverage timeline. You, to the second, follow Simi, distant surveillance 500 meters minimum. I want to know where she goes, who she contacts, and whether her story holds up. You, to the third, go to Konoha. Find the cover clone, get a status update, and check in on Anko's progress. The clones nodded and vanished into the rain. Naruto sat under the overhang and pulled out the communication scroll. He turned it over in his hands, studying the ceiling work. It was competent, not Uzumaki level, but solid, with a summoning array that connected to a linked scroll through what appeared to be a dedicated pocket dimension. Kirigakure sealing methodology, adapted for field use. No traps that he could detect, no surveillance components, no hidden functions. He set it down and closed his eyes. Well, the fox asked, I'm thinking, think faster. The route team is a more immediate problem than the woman. I know. If they find the facility, your operation is finished. Danzo seizes everything, your notes, your maps, your intelligence files. And he finds evidence that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki has been building a shadow network outside Konoha's control. The response to that discovery would be, definitive. I said I know. Then know this. You cannot solve this problem alone. You have a partner in Konoha who is unavailable. You have a potential ally offering cooperation, and you have a clock running down. Sometimes the risk of trust is lower than the risk of isolation. Is the nine-tailed demon fox giving me advice about trusting people? I'm giving you advice about survival. Trust is a tool. Use it or don't, but don't pretend the decision is about anything other than pragmatism. Naruto opened his eyes and looked at the scroll. The fox was right. He hated it, but the fox was right. 5 days before Root's search pattern reached the facility, Anko wouldn't be back for at least 36 more hours. He could relocate the facility's sensitive materials, the intelligence files, the notebooks, the evidence of his operation, but that would take time he might not have, and doing it alone meant spreading himself thin in a way that created its own vulnerabilities. Simi had a team. 6 operatives. If she was genuine, if her offer of cooperation was real, those operatives could provide the coverage he needed to stay ahead of Root while he secured the facility. And if she wasn't genuine, he was handing her the keys to his operation. He picked up the scroll, bit his thumb, drew a line of blood across the summoning array. A small puff of smoke, and a slip of paper appeared, blank, waiting for a message. He wrote quickly, in a cipher he'd developed from the Uzumaki sealing notation the fox had provided, one that would be meaningless to anyone who didn't have the key, interested in coordination. Immediate operational need, 4-person hostile team in my sector, systematic search pattern, 5-day window. Can your people provide interference? Location details on request. He sealed the message. The scroll pulsed, the summoning array activated, and the slip of paper vanished. Then he leaned back against the rock and waited for the world to respond. The response came in 40 minutes. A new slip of paper materialized on the scroll, written in the same cipher. She'd cracked his notation system in 40 minutes, which was either alarming or reassuring depending on how he chose to interpret it. 3 operatives available. Can provide diversion and misdirection for hostile search teams. No direct engagement unless authorized. Need search pattern data and sector boundaries. Send via scroll. See me. He sent the data. Within 2 hours, his surveillance clone reported that 3 unfamiliar chakra signatures had appeared in the sector, moving carefully, avoiding detection, but present. They were positioning themselves along the projected path of Root's search pattern, in locations where they could create distractions, false trails, and environmental interference that would slow the search without triggering an alert. Professional work. Clean, quiet, and effective. By evening, his clone at the facility reported that the Root team's search pattern had shifted. They'd encountered what appeared to be evidence of recent activity in a sector 2 kilometers south of the actual facility. Fresh footprints fabricated, a campfire remnant staged, and a faint chakra trace planted. That would lead them on a 3-day detour through terrain that contained nothing of interest. Simi's people had bought him time. Not a lot. Root would eventually realize they'd been misdirected and resume their systematic sweep. But enough to secure the facility. Enough for Anko to get back. Enough to breathe. The 3rd clone's memories hit him at sunset, the one he'd sent to Konoha. The cover clone was holding. Anko had arrived on schedule, spent 5 hours in the village performing a pitch-perfect impression of herself. Loud, aggressive, and memorable in all the right ways. She'd filed a mission report with enough personality to satisfy a dozen analysts, had a loud argument with a Chunin in the break room of the intelligence division about whether dango was a legitimate breakfast food, and departed through one of Naruto's concealed wall exits without anyone noticing she'd left. The intelligence division analyst who'd flagged the discrepancy had closed the inquiry. Case resolved. Mitarashi Anko, consistent but unremarkable. No anomalies. Naruto let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. 1 fire extinguished. 1 alliance tentatively formed, and 1 clock still ticking, 5 days, minus whatever Simi's diversion had bought him before Root closed in on the truth. But for now, for this evening, sitting under a rock overhang in the land of rivers while rain dripped, and the fox dozed behind the seal, and 3 fragile threads of trust held the darkness at bay. For now, it was enough. He fell asleep without meaning to and dreamed the fox's dreams. This happened sometimes. When his guard was down, when the seal's membrane between their consciousness thinned, the Kyubai's memories bled through in fragments that felt more real than waking life. He'd learned to navigate them, to stay present within the flood of ancient sensation without drowning in it. Tonight the fox dreamed of fire, not destruction, not the mindless conflagration that the village associated with the Kyubai's attack. This was older. This was a memory from before the villages, before the nations, before the world had been carved into territories and politics. The fox ran through a forest that no longer existed, under a sky that held stars in positions that hadn't been seen for centuries. It ran for the joy of running, its 9 tails streaming behind it like banners, its paws striking the earth with a force that left craters but harmed nothing, because the land was vast and empty and belonged to no one. And then the dream shifted, the way the fox's memories always did, lurching sideways in time, skipping decades like stones across water. The forest was gone. In its place, a battlefield. Humans, thousands of them, fighting with techniques that Naruto recognized as primitive versions of modern ninjutsu. The fox stood at the edge of the carnage and watched with eyes that held something Naruto had never associated with the Kyuubi before: sadness, not for the dead, not for the violence, for the waste, for the sheer, grinding stupidity of creatures with lifespans measured in decades spending those decades trying to destroy each other over patches of dirt that would outlast them all by millennia. The dream shifted again. A man, no, not a man, something more. White robes, white hair, eyes that held rings within rings. The sage. Naruto knew him from the fox's other memories, from the fragments of history that predated everything the academy taught. The sage of 6 paths, the father of ninjutsu, the one who had created the tailed beasts from the chakra of the 10 tails. The sage sat with the fox. Just sat on a hillside, under a sky that was the same sky Naruto had watched with Anko 2 weeks ago. The same stars, the same silence. "They will fear you," the sage said. His voice was calm, old, kind in a way that nothing in Naruto's waking life had ever been kind. "They will hate you. They will seal you and use you and call you a demon because they cannot understand what you are." "I know," the fox said. And in the dream, its voice was different, younger, rawer, without the layers of hatred and bitterness that 9 centuries of imprisonment had built. "But some of them," the sage continued, "will surprise you. Some will look past the fear and see what I see. It may take a very long time. But it will happen. How do you know?" the fox asked. The sage smiled. "Because I made you from hope as much as from chakra. And hope is the one thing humans cannot kill, no matter how hard they try." The dream dissolved. Naruto woke with wet cheeks and the taste of smoke in his mouth, sitting under a rock overhang in a country that wasn't his. And for a moment he couldn't remember who he was, the boy or the fox, the vessel or the thing contained. Then the moment passed, and he was Naruto again. Just Naruto. 14 years old, exhausted, sitting in the rain, carrying a weight that would have crushed anyone who thought about it too carefully. He didn't think about it too carefully. He wiped his face, packed his gear, and started moving. The rain had stopped. The first stars were visible through gaps in the cloud cover. He looked at them for a moment. The same stars the sage had sat beneath, the same stars Anko had named with Orochimaru's cruel, lonely humor. And then he turned north toward the facility, toward the work, toward whatever came next. He arrived at the facility at midnight to find Anko already there. She was sitting on the hillside above the entrance, her coat spread beneath her, eating an apple she'd presumably stolen from a market in Konoha on her way out. She looked tired but intact, no new bruises, no tension in her posture, no sign of trouble. "You're early," he said. "You're late." She tossed him an apple. He caught it. "Konoha's handled. The analyst is satisfied. The cover clone is refreshed. And I started a rumor in the intelligence division break room that I'm seeing someone from the Inuzuka clan, which should generate enough gossip to keep people talking about me without actually looking at me for at least a month. The Inuzuka clan. They're loud, they're messy, and they're exactly the kind of bad decision everyone expects me to make. Perfect cover. She bit into her apple. How was your mystery, woman? He sat down beside her and told her everything. See me, the former hunter nin, the offer of cooperation, the route diversion, the communication scroll. He told her about the fox's dream too, though he wasn't sure why. It wasn't operationally relevant. But it felt important, and Anko was the only person in the world he could tell. She listened without interrupting, finishing her apple and starting on a second one she produced from a pocket. You trusted her, she said when he'd finished. Fast. I trusted her team to run a diversion. That's not the same as trusting her. It's a start, and she delivered. Anko was quiet for a moment, chewing. A 6-person team of former Kiri hunter nin operating independently in the border regions. That's a significant force. If she's genuine, she's the best ally we could ask for. And if she's not, then she's the most dangerous enemy we've made yet. But I don't think she is. Anko looked at him. I read people for a living, Naruto. You described someone who sounds like me, broken by a system, freed from a seal, trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage. That's not a profile you fake. That's a wound you carry. He thought about that, about broken seals and broken people and the things that grew in the spaces where institutions failed. I want you to meet her, he said. I figured. When? 2 days. I'll set up a meeting through the scroll, neutral ground, the river gorge where we first talked. Anko nodded. Then she leaned back on her hands and looked up at the sky. The clouds had cleared further and the stars were bright, bright enough that Naruto could see constellations he didn't know the names of. The fox's dream, Anko said. The sage, what he said about hope. Yeah. Do you believe it? That hope is something humans can't kill? Naruto thought about it. About the village that had thrown him away, and the woman beside him who'd been thrown away too, and the stranger across the border who'd been thrown away by a different village in a different way. About the network he'd built from nothing, the partnership he'd forged from loneliness, the alliance he was reaching toward across a gulf of justified suspicion. I don't know if I believe it as a universal truth, he said, but I believe it as a choice. I choose it. Every day. And so far, it keeps being the right call. Anko was quiet for a moment, then she bumped her shoulder against his gently, the way you'd nudge someone to let them know you were there. Good answer, kid. They sat together on the hillside, eating stolen apples, watching the stars turn overhead while the forest breathed around them, and the facility hummed beneath their feet and the world, vast and dangerous and full of people who wanted to control or destroy the things they'd built, continued to spin. Somewhere in that world, Danzo's route team followed a false trail through empty forest. Somewhere, Kabuto Yakushi opened a new file and began planning an approach. Somewhere, Simi waited for a message from a 14-year-old who might be the most important person she'd ever met. And here, on a hillside between nations, 2 people who'd been thrown away sat together in the dark and chose, again, to be worth something. The stars didn't care. But the stars had never been the point.